Wachusett Regional School District Committee, number 1359. Are we streaming tonight live? Person will
Yes,
be.
I believe so.
I'm sorry. I think that was Barry and Randy at the same time.
We do have 11 recording.
We have quorum. Okay. And Barry, are we streaming are we streaming live?
Yes, stream is live.
Thank you. And the meeting is being recorded. Thank you everyone for joining. The first item on the agenda for tonight is public hearing. This week we've made available a form to register to address the committee live through Google Meets. We have a few speakers this evening, and as with meetings in the past, we ask that you state your name and address, address your comments to the chair, keep your comments under 2 minutes, disconnect from the meeting at the conclusion of your remarks, and finally, if you would like to forward a written version of your comments, you may do so to Randy Jacob if you wish for them to be included in the public record. The first speaker that I have this evening is Bob Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. This is Bob Levine, 129 Cannon Road. I'm chairman of the Holden Board of Selectmen. Just wanted to say we received the budget request for FY22 and the 7.5% increase that it would represent to the town of Holden. It's significantly more than the 3% we had requested that it appears to have not passed through. So I met with the town manager and I wanted to, we went through what would it look like if the budget is presented past town meeting, and I wanted to discuss it with you through the chair and to our Holden delegates, what those service reductions would look like in Holden. And these are not doom and gloom things. These are actual cuts that we would have to put onto the table. And aside from basic services like the senior center and the library, seeing a reduction in hours, we'd be looking at wholesale cuts to some of the programs that they have as well. Our field maintenance would be minimal, and the playing fields wouldn't be ready for the sports leagues. And at the last regular Board of Selectmen meeting, we discussed the need to subsidize the pool operations, which is not normal for us. It's a fee-based structure, but given the uncertainty of COVID, we had to subsidize it last year. We'll have to do it again this year. The budget as presented would be make closing the pool for the summer a very real possibility for us. DPW would likely be cut. Our plowing and ice treatments would be minimal and not to the level that our residents have come to expect, causing slight public safety concern. Municipal snow removal from the sidewalks would be cut in full. Cemetery upkeep would be down, and road repair would have to be pushed to the future. Public safety would be facing real headcounts. We're not talking open recs. I'm talking actual reductions in police and fire. Our ambulance services would have to be cut by 1/3. Traffic enforcement officer would be removed, reduction in police patrols, and probably the most significant for us, we would have to close our Chaffin substation of the Holden Fire Department, which services our entire south side of our community. That creates a real public safety issue for us. We never really, in the time I've been on the board, we haven't padded our budget. We live pretty responsibly. We think it's responsible government, good fiscal management. The budget is presented to be 70% of our budget. 10 years ago, it was 42% of our budget. But Holden's lost 182 students of the 417 kids that left the district this year. And aside from the savings that the district had in utilities and buses and heating, this doesn't reflect the loss in students as well. So we're looking at the biggest tax increase in Holden in over a decade. And if this budget were to pass as is, we'd be seeing drastic decrease in quality of life and services. So again, we ask that you go back and sharpen the pencils a little bit. We look forward to working with you, but we wanted to hear from me what we're up against this year if this budget passes as presented. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next, I have Julie Reno.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak tonight. My name is Julie Reno. I live here in Holden. It's 10 Frederickson Ave. I wanted to come on and comment regarding the school situation as it has been for the last year. I'm reaching out to kind of implore you all to stop, and pause before any more excuses come out regarding why we cannot return full time. Instead, I'd request everyone to kind of reframe their mindset with, okay, well, this is a challenge. How can we get back? How can we overcome this challenge? The remote and hybrid will not be supported in the fall. I really very humbly request that we get them back as soon as possible. what this would do is it would allow our students to reacclimate to the buildings and being full-time again. Their little bodies have been home for a full year and haven't had this level of structure in a year. It would also allow any emotional or stress responses to be addressed by students and staff, for both the students and staff. And it would also allow us to get all the kinks out of the system before the fall. So we don't have any more lost learning time in the fall. It would allow a seamless transition back to school. It's safe. We've had a multitude of districts all around us and throughout the country who've been back since the fall. And the science shows that their transmission in school is minimal. Preschools, daycares, camps, and even remote learning centers that have popped up have all been open without any issue. There are going to be other illnesses and other pandemics probably now that Pandora's box has been opened, and we have to do a better job at responding to this. We cannot allow these things to shut down our school system and allow there to be every excuse in the book given for why we don't go back. The excuses have evolved. It was, we don't have the buses, we don't have the spacing because of the 3 and 6 feet requirements. And now it's, well, not until we have our vaccines. And, the next thing will be not until the students have their vaccines. Like, there's been an evolution of excuses, and I think we need to have enough and be done with these excuses. My taxes have paid for a free, appropriate public education. My child has been stripped of his right to this free, appropriate public education for the last year. Nobody's asking for homeschooling to be taken off the table, but please allow our kids to go back to school full time and give them back their rights. That's really all I have for tonight. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Julie Hurley.
Hi there, my name is Julie Hurley, and I'm at 444 Marshall Street in Paxton, Mass. And I have 2 kids at Paxton Center School, a kindergartner and a 2nd grader. And I first would just like to say that it's truly the kids that have been the superheroes throughout this pandemic. And I know oftentimes other groups are recognized, but for everything that they've had to experience and have their world flipped upside down and have to learn at home just has been circumstances that are completely unknown to them. And I think that it's time that we give their life back to them as far as their school environment. I will say that, over the last week or two, we hear from, our governor stating that it is safe for the kids to be in the classroom, regardless of community transition rates. And as long as people are abiding by the protocols, it is a safe environment. And I think, the district, I think we can say that we are following the protocols and it is a safe environment. And then also from hearing from the Commissioner of Department of Education, they are aiming to have all the elementary students back in the classroom 5 days a week. And I truly hope that this district, being, as exceptional as it is, strongly considers this in the state that we're at now. I truly don't want to see my children in particular have to continue to go through this type of environment. It doesn't get any easier. They are in the hybrid model now, and they're much happier in the classroom. And I will share that my daughter one day last week, and she's in kindergarten, one of the days when the Wi-Fi was out, I was like, oh, how was your day? And she shared that, it was great. The teacher didn't have to rush. So I think these kids at any age are much more receptive than people might think they are. They understand, what's happening around them, and, they want the full attention of their teachers. They want to be able to interact with their peers. And I just hope that, while there still is some time left this year, that this district can maximize on that and really take action. And I just ask that please don't send us another survey and ask us questions and not truly, take action from the results that you come back with. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Next, I have Mary Shepard.
Good evening. Mary Shepard, President, Wachusett Regional Education Association, 1320 Wachusett Street, Jefferson. We, WREA members, embrace the full return of students to our classrooms in April. We look forward to hearing the district's specific plan to implementing DESE's guidelines for expanded in-person learning. We hope Superintendent McCall keeps the safety for both students and educators at the forefront of his decision-making. And as always, the WREA intends to keep the lines of communication open with the district administration as Wachusett increases the in-person student capacity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So finally, I've received a letter from a resident named Rosemary Heinold, who wishes for her letter to be read during public hearing and not address us live, and I've agreed to do so. Rosemary Heinold lives at 378 Malden Street in Holden. The letter is dated December 4th, 2020, and it reads as follows. Wachusett School Committee. As a lifelong resident of the Wachusett region and alumna of its school system, I would like to weigh in on the current sad condition of the Wachusett District Schools. My children are also products of the system, and my grandchildren are currently in the system, and since I taught for several years in the system, so I feel I have some perspective here. Last winter, I read about the hiring of a director of social emotional learning at a six-figure salary. Since I firmly believe that the direction of a child's emotional state should be his or her parent's primary responsibility, I wanted to know exactly what this person would be doing in the schools. By this time, children were no longer being taught in person due to COVID, and it was pretty obvious that the school system had not prepared for this situation, and children were in fact not being educated at all. I called the superintendent's office and asked to speak to Mr. McCall. He was out of the office, so I left a voice message. When I didn't hear from him in a reasonable time, I called again. The secretary who answered said he was working from home and she would pass along the message. When I still didn't hear from him, I called again. This time the secretary said he was working from home and asked what I wanted to speak with him about. I asked for a copy of the job description for a director of social and emotional learning. She said he hadn't been updated since the last person who held the job, excuse me, wasn't this supposed to be a new position, and then regaled me with what a nice young man the new director was. After several more attempts, I finally received a copy of the job description. It was dated May 2018, but reading the 160 words it contains, one would never attach a six-figure salary to the position described. Wondering what the new director's job really was, I called back until Mr. McCall finally called me. I was not impressed. He had few answers. He had done little planning, and his hangdog attitude exhibited no enthusiasm for the challenges he was facing. It was obvious that he was unprepared as he described how woefully understaffed he was and how school systems of our size are normally staffed with twice as many people as he has. As the final arbiters of the hiring process, the school committee is equally responsible with the superintendent for the disgraceful irresponsibility of the hiring for this position, regardless of what a nice young man the new director was. You can then imagine my surprise when I read that the superintendent had assigned the COVID task force leadership to this brand new hire who didn't have a current job description. Such an abdication of leadership during a time of crisis should have been grounds for immediate termination of Mr. McCall. The fact that the school committee did not do so is an indication of the school committee's incompetence and lack of leadership, and is the reason that the Wachusett schools find themselves in the sad state that they are in today. For the salary being paid to the superintendent, there are highly qualified administrators available who would get the schools moving ahead. You should hire one. I scroll down a second here. I won't even go into the disgraceful motives of the teachers union. The education of our kids seems to be the last thing all of you are interested in. As an FYI, St. John's High School in Shrewsbury received the very same stay-home order that every other school received. The students there were given one day off to get set up for at-home learning this past March. The second day, they began a full schedule of classes, which progressed almost seamlessly until the end of the school year. When the 2021 school year began, they were back in school in person, full-time, literally without losing a step. Why aren't the Wachusett schools back in session? Due to your incompetence and irresponsibility, your kids have lost a year of education that will negatively follow them for the rest of their lives. Do you not realize that while kids are at home receiving little to no valid instruction, many parents cannot work? You are destroying these kids and their families. As all state and federal officials have stated, these kids belong in school. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. Signed, Rosemary E. Heinold. I don't see any other listings in the public hearing. Without objection, I'd like to take the chairman's remarks out of order. I'll try to be brief. So I received notification with the rest of the committee last week that Chair Weeks has stepped down from school committee. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank her for her 5 years of service and wish her well. Under our bylaws, the vice chair assumes the roles and responsibilities of the chair, and I've agreed to do so for the remainder of this term. I'm humbled to serve you all in this capacity and will do my best to guide us through a productive meeting. We're coming to a very busy time for all school committees, even in a regular year. And in addition to creating and passing a budget, we'll look to entertain plans for a return to in-person learning, evaluation of the superintendent, and a review of the regional agreement. Our agenda tonight is organized around discussion topics, and we'll start with a facilitated discussion on budget priorities. I'd ask that you raise your hand to speak through the chat this time, as opposed to doing a round-robin call-upon approach on the topic that's before us as we take one topic at a time. We do have a full agenda tonight, and I, again, am humbled to guide us through it. And I'd like to then turn to item number 2, which is election of a vice chair. So at this time, I'd entertain nominations for vice chair.
Since it's so quiet, I'll nominate Christina Smith, since she did a good job when I was chair for vice chair.
Is there a second to the nomination?
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay. Any other nominations for vice chair? Hearing none or seeing none, we'll move forward to a roll call vote. Robin, can you call the vote? Robin, are you there?
Do you mean Randy?
Randy.
I'm sorry, Randy.
Yeah, I'm right there. Well, I wasn't answering. I wasn't, sorry about that.
Well, now I understand why. My apologies, Randy.
Okay. So I'm proceeding with the vote. So Member Ayala,
Yali, yes.
Member Bennett,
Bennett, yes.
Member Brown,
Brown, yes.
Member Gustafson,
Yes.
Member Haber,
Haber, yes.
Member Ember, but I'm not sure. I don't think he's on. So I'm going to proceed with Member Kirschenbaum,
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Lavoy,
Lavoy, yes.
Member Longbelly, well,
Balil, yes.
thank you. Member Mills,
Mills, yes.
Member Mitchell, I do not believe is on the call, so I'm going to go to Member Otmar,
Otmar, yes.
Member Pantos,
Pantos, yes.
Member Shapiro,
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva,
Silva, yes.
Member Smith. Does she vote on her own?
No, I'll abstain.
Okay. Member Sullivan,
Sullivan, yes.
Member Williamson,
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland,
Woodland, yes.
Member Young.
Young, yes.
I'm going to go back to the chair, Member Dennis.
Dennis, yes. Congratulations, Christina. I'm not sure whether you wanted that or not, but you got it.
I did not. I'm in shock. Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Thank you all for your votes. I was not expecting that at all. I look forward to working with all of you in this capacity again and to working with Chair Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item 4, student representatives reports. Our student reps on the line.
Yeah, I'm here. I can start.
Go ahead.
So this past week we had our science fair, and those results are coming out tonight. So students should be notified of their placements tonight, which will determine who our representatives to regional and state science fair will be. So that's super exciting. The fall too, like waiver season, has recently started with football, girls volleyball, and then cheerleading, all playing in the coming weeks. Our seniors 50-day countdown party is tomorrow, and so we'll start the countdown to the last 50 days of school. Students have begun scheduling for next year, and getting picking courses for the upcoming year, and we were able to offer a few new courses for that next year, which is super exciting. On March 10th, the school is so excited to be offering a wellness day for all students and staff to come together and promote student mental health. We chose March 10th in sort of in honor of COVID-19 and how everything shut down last year in order to celebrate everything that we've accomplished over the past 365 days and sort of work on promoting mental health in the pandemic. There's options for everyone, from fitness to art. I know Director Keenan's running a workshop on stress. All of them look so fun. They're so unique and so interesting. So signups for that began today. And so students and staff are all welcome to sign up for those. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Catherine. Kenichi, do you have something?
I have one thing as well. March PSATs are coming up. They are, I believe, on the 13th. So for high schoolers taking the PSAT, good luck.
All right. Any questions from the membership for Catherine or Kenichi? All right, thank you. Let's see, moving on, go to the superintendent's report. The first item that we have, I'll entertain a motion to affirm the accuracy of policy 6613, policy relating to pupil services, athletic head injury, and concussion policy. Yes, so I'll entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Dara, do you want to give a brief overview on why this is on the agenda tonight?
Sure, Mike. So basically, every year on an annual basis, the school district, we have to provide the Mass Department of Public Health just an affirmation that the WRSDC policy on concussions is accurate and adhered to. So what we have done is that we've had Jen Litch, who is our athletic director, look through this policy, confirm that it's accurate, and then what we do is you vote on it, and then we share a letter with Mass DPH confirming your actions.
Any comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, Randy, you can call the roll.
Sure. Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Member Bennett?
Yes.
Member Brown?
Brown, yes.
Member Dennis? Or do you?
Yes.
Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Haber?
Haber, yes.
Member Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Member Lavoy?
Lavoy, yes.
Member Longbilio?
Longbilio, yes.
Member Mills?
Mills, yes.
Member Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Member Pantos?
Pantos abstain.
Member Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Member Silva?
Silva, yes.
Member Smith?
Smith, yes.
Member Sullivan?
Sullivan, yes.
Member Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Member Young?
Young, yes.
Thank you for that. Motion passes. So now we'll move into discussion of the report. Again, as I mentioned at the offset, a little bit different this time around. Rather than ask the superintendent to kind of go over the total extent of his report, we're going to go topic by topic. Rather than call on people in a round-robin format, after the superintendent gives his report, for example, of budget priorities, which is the first item or first topic under the report, you may wish to comment or speak or ask a question using the chat. We use a chat order. Once we finish the discussion on budget priorities, we'll move on to the second item, which is the plan to increase in-person learning. Okay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daryl for a discussion on budget priorities.
Thank you very much, Mike. So what I'll do right now is I'll present my screen.
We can see it, Daryl.
Thank you so much, Bob. So again, thank you so much to all of you for kind of allowing us to gain some information over the past couple of days. So really our topics for discussion, as Chair Dennis mentioned, we'll start off with the budget priorities right now. Second topic, when we come back to it, will be our plan to increase in-person learning for this school year. The third will be the vision for the model for school year 21-22, basically how we're kind of seeing how September will probably play out. And then finally, we have to discuss the regional agreement a little bit. So budget priorities. On, I think last Monday, we sent a survey out to all WRSDC members, basically looking for recommendations around FY22 budget planning. And I'll open up that document real quick. And I just want to make sure, Bob, can you see this? It should be good. So this is the information that we gathered from, we had 14 members fill out the survey, and the survey was broken up into the 5 domains. So we basically just took all of the raw data from here and we shared it with all school committee members the other day. So you can actually go through and take a look at these responses. And I'll go back. So basically, what we've done is that we've outlined over the next several slides, a way in which we can probably organize these a little better so that they are a little more easy to digest, and we'll actually be able to facilitate some discussion around these. So not only are we doing this evening, but we're also gathering information from our principals and directors around budget planning for FY22, and all of this will be used as we push forward for our budget hearing and ultimately the budget vote in mid-March. So for the survey results, so the following items, we have 2 slides here. These items did not have specific budget implications, so I just want to talk through these a little bit. So some members had talked about social media having an online presence for communication. Those are excellent ideas. I do think that's something that we need to do a much better job at. And when we're talking about this specifically, text notifications is something that we've been working on this year, sending out more surveys. And there was also some talk about maybe putting some more video updates. Me, principals, other people who work within the administration, something that people could watch. They'd be able to see us talking through something. So it's a non-budgetary issue. But it is definitely a great idea. Next one was on budget transparency and line item budget. We're trying to do a much better job at budget transparency. We've been doing this now for, 5, 6, 7 years. Line item budget was just finally produced today. Director Didi did complete that, and that's ready to go. So that will be shared with everyone. There was some question around clarifying the role for the consultant. And again, the consultant, Mary Mead Montague, has played a nice role in terms of giving us support around different items that we're working on administratively to try to get the kids back into school, how we're doing with hybrid learning, those types of things. So again, that's not a non-budgetary issue in terms of clarification. Simco reports to inform budget decisions. I think they probably meant school improvement plans to inform budget decisions. And again, as we kind of go through, and this year is an odd year in terms of how everything's played out with our budget, because as we all know, the past 365 days, give or take, it's not been a typical year. But it's something that we will look at and will continue to look at. Bias in curriculum materials. Again, this is something that as we kind of look at our ed subcommittee, this is an area that we can look at as well, because this is something that we have to kind of focus on in terms of being able to really project what we need to do in order to ensure that our curriculum is not filled with bias across the board. And then improve programmatic consistency, looking at how we can have a more consistent program of study across the board in our K-8 buildings. And then on second page, reinforce best practices, best remote practices to enrich curriculum. It's something that we're continuing to do. And again, what we've learned this year in terms of remote learning and also how it's playing out in person, I think will help inform how we move forward into the future. And what's interesting, the next one is reduce screen-based instruction. That is something that I've talked about. I've not been a big fan of our early elementary students spending too much time on a computer. It's really a time for them to explore, to really, work with one another, learn to work with one another versus a screen. So that's a direction we'll continue to move. There was something around a Chromebook, having the Chromebook program up to date for 6 through 12. And again, all of our students, grades 6 through 12, now have been issued a Chromebook. Redefining textbooks, like what is a textbook? How might we end up looking at them? And again, when we're thinking about a textbook for us, and Deputy Berlow talks about this frequently, our textbook line is more than just textbooks now. It really includes technology, platforms, those types of things. Becoming a trauma-informed district or school. And again, this is a specialized kind of program that we would actually have to participate in, but it's definitely something I think we need to look into and, actually study as we kind of go through this process. If it's something that we want to do, how might we do it and move forward with it? Job descriptions for new positions, that's a given. PD feedback from staff and consistent district-wide professional development. Again, professional development has been an area that we've been, looking at and working on, for the past several years. And it's, again, it's not always easy, especially as we kind of think about just the broad range of staff that we have here in our district. So we have our 5 domains that we have been working with over the past 5 years through our strategic planning. This has helped us through our budget planning and ultimately talking with our communities about the budget. So what we've done is that we've taken these items and we've consolidated them a little bit. And what I'd like to do this evening is just, as I kind of talk through each one, so domain 1, talk through this. If there are specific questions or comments around the different items that we go through, I'd like to take that now briefly, and then we can come back to it at the end after we actually go through and do a quick little survey. So domain 1, leadership, governance, and communication. Most of what we ended up pulling together from domain 1 was really around administrative positions. So many people talked about, having an assistant business manager, making sure we replace the deputy superintendent, looking at the nurse leader, COVID-related support, having a person that really could continue to provide support around COVID moving forward so that we weren't so reliant upon either Director Keenan, Deputy Berlow, myself to do all that information, collect it all. Having a data manager, having someone that has the capacity to look at data. Having maybe an assistant special ed director, someone to assist us with our special ed programming. And then ultimately curriculum coordinator and or PD coordinator. I just talked about professional development. It is an area that is a challenge for us, and that could be another position that we could be looking at down the road. So again, are there comments or questions or anything that anyone needs to bring up associated with these items? And I can't tell if there are hands, so I'm looking at my other screen. And if there aren't,
I don't see Sherry Haber.
Okay.
Thank you. Just to clarify, are any of these positions currently in the line item budget right now? Or are these just all from the survey?
Yep. So good question, Sherry. So they were in the survey, but some people said, hey, I still want to have a deputy superintendent. That is in our budget. We also have the nurse leader, the resource nurse position. That's in the budget for right now as well. These other positions, assistant business manager, that's one that we're looking at consolidating some positions. So it could be there. It might not have a true dollar sign to it, but it could be a position that we're able to put forth. And the other ones would be extra positions. So those are not in the budget right now. Great question.
Yeah, Linda Woodland.
So I just wanted to ask about the possibility of a director of facilities position, if that would be included in this as a sort of already in the budget, but maybe needs to be adjusted, or a brand new item.
Yeah, great question. So that's kind of already in the budget, Linda. And I think we really put this in there based upon the different items that were just listed in the survey, but that's something that we're focusing on doing anyway.
I have Malaya and then Linda Longbleal.
So my only comment is, and I've said this before, I think the data manager type skill set, I don't know if that needs to be a specific position, but I think someone with those skill sets could be folded into something like a deputy superintendent or a curriculum person, something we already have existing. And I think or assistant business manager even, because so much data comes out of there. I think when I've thought about that in the past, it's something that could be useful in maximizing our resources and efficiency, from curriculum to surveying parents to how is hybrid going to data that we ask you all for all the time, and help us also access funding, because the more we can look into data and ask the right questions, the more we can access additional funding or do so more efficiently. So I mean, I put that in there, but I certainly think that it's something that could be a skill set tied to something else, and perhaps something to look for in that way, even if it's not its own position, because obviously funding is tight, but it's something that I think could gain us additional funding and help us in other ways. So.
Yeah, thank you, Malaya. And I can tell you, years ago, when I first came on board here in the district, there actually was a data person, and it wasn't exclusively their job, but they spent an awful lot of time looking at test scores, looking at special ed numbers, looking at how we were doing in reference to other districts. So it's something that kind of morphed into technology. So it's definitely something that we could try to pull back into some of the other positions.
Not just data, but surveys and, that whole field of, I don't know what to call it, but not just looking at the numbers, but how you gather information, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Thank you. So we got Linda Longbleal.
Yes, I can't quote you at the moment, but I didn't quite understand what you meant when you talked about the assistant business director position.
Right. So the assistant business, what we're looking at doing, Linda, is taking a position that we currently have within the confines of the business office, and really upgrading it to an assistant business manager position. So whether or not it's just through title or through the addition of a little bit of funding, it's really to better define a position to help support Dan in that office and give more oversight.
So you'd be converting a current position to, say, a higher level position, basically.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Darryl, if I could just jump in for a second, the net increase of that is between 5 and 10,000 on the high end, 5 on the low end. Given we're looking to do some reorganizing in the business office, and I submitted a reorg chart to Superintendent McCall relative to that reorg.
And do you feel that doing that, creating that position in that way would meet your needs?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have Ken next.
These are all good. We're going to talk about a bunch of good stuff. We can't afford any of this. I mean, the things that we're replacing, we can, but I just want to keep in mind, what Bob Levine said, the fact that we're still down almost 6 teachers from where we were last year, and we're talking about adding other positions that aren't classroom teachers. Everything on the list is good, but aside from what we're replacing, I can't see how we can do any of this year. My 2 cents.
No, I hear you, Ken.
I have Mike Pantos.
I think Carl's ahead of me.
Oh no, I was just pointing that Ken used the hand raise feature. Just so, that's all.
I'd just like to emphasize when we're looking at budget stuff, not focusing more on actual hands-on positions. I'm going to use the word hands-on for lack of a better term, and less central office positions. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, Dara, I think we can probably move on.
Thank you. Domain 2, these are budget considerations that we were able to kind of pull together, the responses that all of you had kind of shared with us. So restoring positions reduced in FY21, textbook renewals, stronger science and social studies curriculum, early literacy or a more advanced literacy program, having 8th grade algebra available to all students, dyslexia screening and support, and then equitable reductions, i.e. If we're cutting foreign language or music, then we should probably do a proportional reduction in athletics. So that's just a compilation of all of the responses. And any comments or questions associated with Domain 2? And if there aren't, I can move on. So Domain 3, budget considerations for effective instruction. So pandemic-related remedial need. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, Darryl. A question came in just as you were transitioning. Okay. Kelly, did you have a question on Domain 2 priority items?
I just wanted to bring up that, I know we've had Fountas and Pinnell for a number of years now, and we've put a lot of money into that curriculum and those materials, and it's a great resource. And I think if people have not considered it to be effective, I think it takes a number of years to really get something that comprehensive off the ground. So I would hate to see us abandon that, because it really is such high quality. I think that the staff just, they need to continue working with it and getting through it and give it its due time. That's all.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Again, I think as we kind of go through this, as we've moved through this process, again, kindergarten teachers have now been doing this now for 4 to 5 years, and they're very comfortable with it. First grade teachers are more comfortable with it, and I think that's how it will kind of progress as we move forward with this. So again, that was something that someone had put up there, but I concur with you. So Domain 3, effective instruction, pandemic related remedial needs. So what might we need in terms of supporting students moving forward? Summer ESY programs kind of goes along with the same thing, extended school year programs, if that's necessary, summer support programs, additional staff, that was an item that people added, teachers, paras, substitutes, consistent instruction. Instructional coaches may help address this. It's something that, again, I think it's high on my end in terms of putting instructional coaches into the classroom to support teachers. That's one of the things that we're really seeing would be a benefit ultimately. Someone mentioned librarians, media specialists. So again, librarians are typically on one of these lists. Upgraded teacher equipment, district-wide software licensing, and digital literacy. So tech integration staff will provide support in this area. So that's, when we're talking about digital literacy, that's an area that we have fallen short on for years because we've not had tech support staff. Having 3 people now that can do this across the board will really benefit, I think, all teachers. So any comments or questions for Domain 3? Okay, going once, going twice. All right, Sherry. Go ahead, Sherry.
Sorry, I couldn't type fast enough.
That's all right.
I understand we're talking budget considerations. I would think that pandemic-related remedial needs, summer programs, some of this is going to get covered. Is it not,
Yes.
by COVID funding? I mean, so as much as it's a budget consideration as we're paying for it, we're also, I'm assuming, going to get some money for it too, right?
Yes. So, and again, what we did was we just put items in there that were on that list. But my hope is, once the ESSER 2 funds come through, we're looking at about $335,000. And if the $1.9 trillion stimulus package comes through, that money gets directly sent to school districts. I'm not sure exactly how much we'll see because it's based on Title I funding. So it's not going to be a windfall, but there should be more money to provide support for summer and extended school year extended school day, even through next school year.
Laura?
Thank you, Mike. Just a quick question about the effective instruction, consistent instruction specifically. It seems to me that the need is not necessarily in having the funds, but in the appropriations of how those funds are spent in terms of professional development and having a plan and a robust way to implement that plan for teachers. So I think that one of the ways to sell that, if you will, is to make sure that we have a comprehensive and appropriate plan that is communicated and implemented. And I think that up in the beginning of this presentation, we talked about a curriculum coordinator and PD coordinator. I think that part of our missing the mark here is that we don't have somebody dedicated to that.
Laura, I couldn't agree more with you. Bob and I have been talking about this now for a year or two. And again, if we were to look at the staffing plan, many of these positions actually come out, years down the road. But as I've said, over the past year, when things are going well, this isn't too bad. But when things are a little more challenging, again, the chinks in the armor show up a little faster because we are so short in terms of central office support, curriculum support, PD support, all of those types of items. So thank you for bringing that up, Laura.
All right, I got Ken.
Oh yeah, so I appreciate some of the responses I've gotten from central office about teachers that were cut last year and how that relates to what we're doing next year. But under additional staff, teachers, para subs, that's a pretty loaded thing. Of course, everyone's going to be in support of teachers, but I think what we're going to need to see as a committee sooner than later is a staffing plan. You can't do a 5-year staffing plan anymore, but I mean like a next year staffing plan. Like, where are we now per school and where are we next year per school? Because we heard from Bob Levine, as he points out, Holden's losing a bunch of students. How are we distributing our staff to meet the needs, that we have now versus what we might expect next year? I think we'll need that sort of granular detail when we go to the towns to say, why are we still having as many or possibly more teachers when we have potentially 10% or whatever, 6% less students. So I just think we'll need that kind of level of detail before we go out to sell this to the towns.
I couldn't agree more with you, Ken. In terms of looking at this, one of the things that we're doing is, and I'll talk about this a little later in the presentation, but looking at kids coming back, how many of the kids who left the district are going to be coming back? And again, that's going to play a role in terms of the total number. So if there's a way for us to assess that, do some projections, look at class sizes and so forth, that's going to play an important role in terms of the conversations that we have at town meeting around why we need what we need.
Thank you. Just to step in for a moment, there's an important piece of context that it's important for us to state, and that is that we are in a very compressed time frame with our budget calendar at the moment, and so we're having this discussion of different budget priorities tonight. A week from tonight, we will have our official public hearing. And the following week, we will put the budget up for submission and approval. It would be necessary for us to approve a budget by no later than, I think it's March 17th, in order for that budget to go on to the warrant for the first town meeting. So the timing here is important. And as we hear you, Darrell, mentioned that there is supporting documentation around what the staffing plan will look like for this year, or the basis upon which the budget will be presented from a staffing perspective. that's detail that we're going to need to have as early as our budget hearing, which is a week from today. Next, I have Malaya.
All right. Sorry, my computer's a little slow. I was actually going to say some of that, and I was also going to raise the question, I guess, of the students that are missing, because there's a couple elements of that, some of which apply to the budget process, which we'll probably get to later, and some of it is related to priorities here. That information is helpful, and I wonder if, I did see Director Keenan's report. And one thing I asked him as a follow-up is, are we reaching out to these families that are elsewhere this year? Like, not just hoping they'll contact us, but have we done targeted outreach to survey them, to reach out and say, do you plan to come back? What are the reasons you left? What are the things you were missing? Is it to figure out which of them are COVID related and which of them are not? And how many of them are likely to stay, since private schools are taking deposits for next year now. So most of them have some idea. We really, really need to have done that like 2 weeks ago. And I'm kind of disappointed to hear that we haven't yet. It's no one's fault. It's just we haven't. I think that's really important because it's essential information to know how many of them are coming back, how many kindergartners or first graders didn't come this year because their parents kept them home and they're planning to bring them. Are we going to have twice as many kindergarten classes? We have no idea. And I'd like to know what research you all have done, because I know we have lost students. But the reality is, a lot of them are probably coming back, especially elementary kids. The older kids, I'm not sure. We really don't know, though. And we really need to have some data around that to inform our planning. Because either we're going to have twice as many kids as we expected, or we are not going to know how to meet their needs 2 weeks before school starts, or we're going to be asking for money we don't need. So I think we need to figure that out.
So, Malia, I think the question that's inherent in there is, what is the administration doing to assess and estimate the expected student population for next year?
Yeah,
Carol,
actually find out, not just say, well, we guess statistically this many might come back, but actually getting real data.
Yeah, so again, I think Brennan, Bob, and I have talked about this in terms of getting some information out to those families who have left the district. One of the reasons why, as we kind of move forward with this, as we've kind of moved into this world of trying to get kids back, hopefully in the month of April, looking at having, a full return to in-person learning for all grade levels in September, I think that's going to sway many people's decisions in terms of thinking, okay, you know what, I'm actually thinking about coming back. And as you said, Malaya, at the elementary level, it's probably the area where we'll see the most students return. So that's going to be going out soon. And and again, we'll get that information back, and that'll help us in terms of looking at the overall numbers. When we're talking about a few hundred students split over pre-K through 12, it's not like we're getting 50 kids going into one school. So they are diluted in that sense. So it's not as much of a challenge. But when we're looking at it holistically over the period of the entire district, it's a little different.
We haven't lost particular classrooms in many schools this year because it's not concentrated. So I think that point even needs to be communicated very clearly in our budget documents, that this is how many we plan for this year. We lost some teachers in some other areas, but we didn't wholesale lose classrooms of like kindergarten or first grade or 12th grade or whatever, because that really needs to be explained to people to justify what we're asking for.
And that's something that I do talk about during my presentations with the towns.
Okay, and that's a different tangent, but also, did I hear you just say that you are surveying those students who are gone and those families that have left the district now?
Yeah, we're going to shoot something out to them so we can try to get some information. Again, it's not always easy to gather that information because they're not part of the system anymore. So it's a little more challenging, but we will.
Thank you.
All right, I got Scott next.
Superintendent McCall, besides surveying the students that have left the district, are we looking at the students that are fully remote and their reasons why? And going forward, we touch this in management because if they, especially the older kids in high school, and if they don't want to come back, in the fall, we could be losing the students and some money. And I know we mentioned something about like a Wachusett Remote Academy or something like that, but is the administration reaching out to those students, the parents that decided to stay remote when we went hybrid?
So we have a survey that we put together over the weekend that will be going out tomorrow, Scott, and that will include information around families deciding to stay or switch from, if we do go back to in-person, if they are part of A or B cohort and they're not comfortable sending their student back in full-time, they want to switch to remote, we're going to allow them to do that. That'll give us an idea of who is staying for the remainder of the year. I think I put this in my report. The commissioner has basically come out and said that he's not approving any true remote learning programs for school districts next year. So one of the things that we have to look at, and I'm looking at it with other school districts perhaps as well, is how we can provide some other options for students so that they're not taking off and heading into an online program and we lose their funding and they're no longer Wachusett students. So that's also on the radar right now, Scott.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Domain 4, professional development and structures for collaboration. So again, this goes back to some of the things that we talked about a little earlier. Increased district-wide PD offerings, anti-racism implicit bias training, address teacher stress, and continued training for tech added into FY21. So, looking at all of these, we, Director Keenan and I are meeting with programmers who do specific anti-racism implicit bias training for school districts. We've met with them. We're meeting with them again tomorrow. We're also looking at how to address teacher stress, as well as the PD. And the PD really comes back to having enough support within our central office to organize and oversee. One of the things that we need to do a much better job at as a school district also is tapping into the resources we have, the teachers we have who are already experts. We don't spend an awful lot of time doing that, and I think that's something we need to focus on. And then our training, our tech integration team, our 2 new people have absolutely been fantastic, as well as our 3rd person up at the high school. So they will continue to provide support moving forward with this. So any comments on Domain 4? Okay. Laura.
Sorry, the transitions are too fast for my fingers.
Sorry. Okay.
So a question about how we might leverage teacher expertise in various areas. We have a wealth and a deep knowledge base from our teachers. How do we go about leveraging that? Can we offer some sort of stipend, per workshop, reimbursement of some sort? What is the plan for that? Because that can be while it might include a line item, it also includes a cost-saving measure, because having somebody in-house teaching the staff and providing that ongoing support is a much more cost-effective measure than hiring somebody for a hit-and-run session or 2 from out of the district. So I think that finding a way to provide us with some details in that plan could be useful.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura. Again, at one time, the district would provide PDPs or double PDPs for the person that actually did the presentation. And I've kind of been thinking about this, how we work forward or we move forward with this, tapping into teachers during the summer a little bit. So we're pulling groups together, working with them, helping them define what they're going to do around curricular issues and so forth, and then having them be the ones to provide that support during the school year. So doing this, and again, I have a grander kind of idea of how this is going to work out with teams at building levels, and then a larger team at elementary, middle, and high school level. So we have some continuity.
Okay, I got Mike Pentas.
So I'm expecting a budget book from Dan Deedy tomorrow, and I'm wondering if the different types of trainings, specifically divided by topic, will be mentioned in a line item budget. Because I'm really looking to know that.
Yeah, those wouldn't be, Mike. They're all going
Okay.
to fall under us. They'll all fall under, certain lines in instructional support and supplies.
All right.
All right, I have Krista and then Kelly.
Hi. So I have just a couple of, well, maybe just one question rolled into one. I was just wondering if we realized, or if you guys recognized that if you are training the staff to be trauma informed, that would decrease their stress, decrease the stress of their students, and decrease bias all in one. So I was wondering if we were just going to ignore, getting trauma informed and using those PD days for that, because it would all in one really change the tone of a lot of what's going on, especially the bias, and you would be completely shocked what a little bit of trauma informed study would do for a person's individual stress level. Just knowing where that comes from, and then also that builds empathy amongst their for their students. And they can pass that on. So I would really like to push for that along with or in the same breath of anti-racism and implicit bias training.
Yeah. Thank you, Krista. Definitely. And again, Director Keenan and I talked about that specifically today, in conjunction with the anti-racism programming that we were looking at as well. So I'll spend some more time talking with Brendan, and I'm sure I'll have him actually, we'll speak about how we can kind of move forward with this in a more collective way. So thank you for kind of pointing that out as well.
All right, I got Kelly.
So in kind of tapping into the wealth of knowledge and experience that our teachers have, and then combining that with how much they've developed as online instructors, I think there's a huge opportunity for them to offer online PD for their peers. Because I think teachers have also really appreciated some of that online PD that's flexible and can fit into, kids' bedtimes and things like that. That is just, it makes it easier for them to take advantage of it. It costs us very little.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kelly. I think one of the things this has kind of taught us that, again, PD doesn't have to happen that Wednesday afternoon from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. That's the only time when it can happen. So having the flexibility to have either, an asynchronous, I can go online, I can do this course, and a lot of people are doing that right now. A lot of teachers are kind of following that model. So we'll continue to kind of go that route. And if that's a way that we can go with our own staff, that'd be fantastic. Having them produce it, because I'd really like them to be the producers.
All right, I have a follow-up from Mike Pantas.
I'm just looking to find out what this thing about being a trauma-informed district means. That was mentioned earlier in the presentation, and I heard someone else mention trauma.
Member Bennett, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that was originally your statement in there.
My God, I could talk about it for days. For days. What specifically are you wondering about within being trauma informed?
So Krista, if you can give us maybe a very high-level headline of what it means to be a trauma-informed district, I think it'll help us understand, or maybe help Mike and perhaps others understand what was meant by the budget suggestion.
Wonderful. Okay, so what I am suggesting is that all of the teachers and even the staff and higher ups, all of our leaders and everything, understand the main structure of what creates trauma. And it is not just one instance. It's not just being in a car accident. It is several things all wrapped into one. It could be little things for somebody that happens every single day, or it could be large things that happen in their life. And these things all get combined and they create these massive tensions within their body and they get agitated. So if we understand where that all happens, then we can better relate to our students and better teach them. And we can also better relate to our teachers who are going through the same thing and better teach them to teach students. And they would be better able to teach students if they're not agitated. And they could better understand when students are agitated. And then they would be able to receive better services from the school because they're understanding where those agitations are coming from, as opposed to, oh, that's just a behavior, right? So it's just going to be very important, especially right now, since we do have a collective trauma that we're all gathering right now from several different places, for us to get somewhere in our district where we are helping them not only grow educationally, but also emotionally. Because if you are not emotionally there, present within a classroom, if you are agitated, you are not going to retain any of the information that you are being taught. And you are not going to be able to take tests that are actually going to reflect what you know, because you're agitated. And so I think it's just incredibly important for us to consider, especially now.
Thank you for Chris, for that explanation.
Great.
Dara, I think we're ready to move on to the next one.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Domain 5, budget considerations, student social, emotional, and health needs. So additional counselors, that was added, and this was one that was up there several times. So 6 members identified this as a priority. Again, we do have 3 positions currently in the budget for this year. We've posted those positions. They've not yet been hired, but those are 3 elementary positions that would be split amongst the 6 elementary schools. Begin formal training to address anti-racism, anti-bias work in the district. Again, I've talked about us starting that. Continue the interface counseling referral system. There were a couple of references to that. And again, that's something that is in the budget for next year. Nurse leader, that's in the budget right now. We're still looking for that person. Increased SEL teaching and learning across the district and embedding into instruction. I think that's a very important thing. It's similar to what I think Chris had just talked about. Kids, when there are other things going on in their lives, they have a really hard time learning. That's why, kids who come into school hungry, they're not focused on learning. They're focused on their stomach because they can't concentrate because they're starving. And then health instruction, having health instruction at the elementary and or middle school for our students. So again, those are our social, emotional, and health needs for Domain 5. So any comments or questions on those? And I'll wait. Okay. Ken?
So I know I'm going to win this battle. It's unpopular opinion, but I really don't think we should be hiring anybody more this year. I respect how important the counselors are. I just worry globally that we're creating a structural deficit for next year in terms of our budget. There's at least 3.5% to 5.5% increase, right, in per line for whatever person we bring in. I just hope that you've got that pencil sharpened and think about how we can be creative about people we already have on board to do some of this important work where we have the position in the past. Again, I'm not just saying these aren't super important. They are. I'm just worried that of what our bottom line is going to look like. We can't go into a 1/12 budget. We just can't, because then we can't hire anybody.
I hear exactly what you're saying, Ken. Definitely something that we're being very cautious with, especially thinking about, setting up a structural deficit, not just for next year, it's for years to come. So we need to really be cognizant of that.
I've got Sherry.
To Ken's point, and part of my first question about what is actually already in the budget, and what's just going to be continued, I really feel like we need to look at what we have and what we can work with before we start adding anything else on. Yeah, so like I said, I just really wanted to see. I really looked at this budget consideration priority survey that we took as more of a what can we not cut versus what do we really want.
Right. And I can tell you the 3 counseling positions are in FY21, and they're already carried over into FY22. So again, it's in this year's budget, and it would be in next year's budget as it stands right now at the 3.82%.
I've got Carl.
So I think one thing so I appreciate kind of having the survey and kind of at least giving us the opportunity to kind of talk about kind of like big picture, kind of broad ideas, and to try and generate kind of at least some ideas in terms of what our priorities are. I think what we might have to do, like to be able to give you and the administration something more concrete. I mean, almost a case, almost going to like taking our budget where we are, you put some of the added things on top of that, and then create, just like we had in the spring, like tiered reductions to get us maybe all the way down to a 2% increase. And then we've got a big long list that goes above our 106 and then down to a 2%. And then we can look through that list and kind of rank things, because even with what we already have, if everyone in school committee says, like, you know what, the absolute most important thing that we need next year is a magician at the high school. Even if we have to cut a teacher, we need a magician at the high school. But then we can give you that direction and say that this is such a high priority. It's above class size, it's above or whatever the case may be. But I think that in absence of that, while this is kind of a conversation starter, I don't know if this gets us to the point where, as an administration, you have at least a broad understanding of what, or even like as a committee, I don't know if we have an understanding of what we would say is the most important thing for our district. Counselors, social emotional, special ed, curriculum, lower class size. So there's facilities, and so I think that would help to move us forward closer to a point. And even with that, you could say, like, what's the district's priority for like where we should come in? Should we aim for 2%? Should we aim for 3%? Should we aim for 4% above? And so I think that if we could get there, that would get us in a better place, at least to be able to articulate kind of what we're thinking. I just don't quite think we're there yet.
So Daryl, what we didn't do is lay out through this discussion how you are planning to conduct it. So we're kind of going now step by step, domain by domain, and listing out the information that you've gathered and giving an opportunity for people to comment on basically other people's suggestions. But if I understand correctly, your intention is to give everybody a level set of what the suggestions were, and then to take the committee through a process on voting to prioritize those things, and then give us some feedback on what could conceivably or feasibly be done in this year versus taking a longer term look. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. So, and again, I think, Carl, your point's well taken. Ultimately, that is, there have been years when we've had A, B, C. So A is this much of a reduction, B is this much, and C is this much. So again, this will help us kind of pull everything together. We in our office, we have to plan for a 4% basically down to a 1% or below, no matter what. So, it's in our heads, we have calculations associated with it, but again, we have to look at, how we can get to a point where we're providing the best possible education, but we're not bankrupting the communities. So
All right, I've got Malia and then Matt and then Linda Woodland. Go ahead, Malia.
Yep. Sorry, my computer's slow. All right. Some of what I was going to say was process oriented, so I should probably wait a minute and see where we end up.
Yep.
But I will just say, because it was just said, that in terms of the, I guess I'll say, for lack of a better term, prioritizing. I think one of the things that when we're done with this, I think all of these are obviously important. I appreciate you pointing out which of these are already in this year, and that's why having the document, I know we got one for business and finance that not everyone else got, which would be super helpful for everyone to see. That kind of lays some of this out as well. I think it's helpful because there's priorities, but I also think that part of this is that we have a lot of unknowns still with our budget. We don't know when, if we end up with more COVID funds like we did last year, we need to have a set plan in writing about this is what we're not doing. But if we get extra funds from some source we don't know about, this is what we will add back, and having some list at the end of hopefully this process about that. So people are very clear. Because I think all of these are important, and they're obviously things that people don't want to take away. But I think that's important to keep in mind when we're done with this process, that would be useful, and we are crunched for time, but I think that's essential.
All right, I've got Matt.
All right. A couple of points, and I think Member Mills and Member Ottmer expressed some of the concerns that I had, but I'd like to just take a look at it, having a staffing plan, and not only a staffing plan of what it looks like this year, but what the actual plan is. So one of my concerns is when I see a slide like this, it says that there are 6 additional counselors that we budgeted for this year, but we did not hire those positions to date. So the question is, what is the impact of that? If we take numbers that we've been given historically, it's maybe 75,000 all in. 6 times 75,000 is $450,000. That could be an impact towards next year's budget if we were to say, hey, we didn't hire these people, we budgeted for them, we're going to put that on hold right now. That ends up becoming a $450,000 reduction without having to reduce anything. It's addition by subtraction. So in the absence of having that staffing plan to say, here's what we budgeted for, and I know the town of Rutland asked this pretty consistently, that it seemed like there were 17 positions that we didn't fill that were budgeted for this year. What does that look like from a financial impact perspective? I think that's the biggest thing, because to Member Mills' point, if we're hiring for these now, are we putting ourselves at a structural deficit later on? That's probably one of our most important pieces of information that we could have as a committee to see where our needs are then for next year.
Yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying, Matt. Yeah, and again, I think just quick correction, it was 3 additional counselors, not 6. So, but I think in total, you're right. Looking at what the savings are from this year, and if we move forward and those savings continue, that should be baked into FY22.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the 6 there. So it's probably it's 450,000 this year and last year combined, but 225 per year.
Yep. Yep.
All right, I got Linda Willen.
So what I just wanted to kind of recenter the question on, because I agree that there's this looming problem of what, if about hiring now and then what that does later, or putting these in now and what this does later. But when it comes down to the students, we're going to have parents asking about their kids' education and asking about, well, what are we going to be doing to address this past year that we've been through? And they'll say that it's a need, whether it's academics or mental health. And so how are we going to talk to the parents and kids about not addressing the pandemic education if our budget can't handle it? So kind of piggybacking off of Member Haber's question of what can we not cut, If we can look at this as what is your vision, your target for kind of defraying the impact of the pandemic education, because it seems like we can't really afford much. I am very concerned about keeping the costs lower for the towns. And in the past, I know I've been one who would say, let's just bring it all in. But, you know, bring everything, hire everybody. But I mean, realistically, we can't look at this next year that way. So what I'm looking for is kind of more of what is the target in these domains for how you're going to address the year of pandemic education.
So I think that, you know, Linda, there's, and Daryl, there's another category after these 5 domains. I haven't seen your slide deck, Daryl. I presume that you have it based on the way that the survey was laid out, but perhaps that's a good opportunity to segue into the pandemic category of budget items.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And Linda, you were going down that road, so thank you. You kind of led right to it. So the other item that we pulled together was really around just things that were tied right back to the pandemic, what we're dealing with. So virtual academy, what we might need to do to pull a virtual academy together so students who and families that still want to make sure that they can remain remote, they can remain remote, and we don't lose them to a virtual high school or something else. Full-time in-person learning plan. So having a plan in place so that we know those students that coming back not only this spring, you know, maybe starting in April, but also in September, full force. Pooled testing, you know, and again, these are all these items have some type of budget item related to, or budget consideration that we have to look at. So pooled testing, in order to do pooled testing, the state will cover a certain number of weeks, and then after that, the school district has to pay for it, and whether or not we continue that in the fall. PPE, again, you know, and I think Malaya mentioned this, much of this is still grant dependent. We have tapped into PPE through grants, and, you know, I'll talk about that in a slide or two as well. And then summer remediation and tutoring. Those are those 2 areas, and tutoring can be after school. Tutoring can be, you know, during the summer, remediation in person, remediation remotely. Again, those are the different things that we have to look at to see how we can support students coming back in. And Linda, that was, you know, these are really those items that kind of go along with it. So any comments or questions on these? Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Okay. So I guess what I would want to know, though, is how do we tie this back to the domains, the positions, the PD? How can we tie this back into how to really target, you know, that we still will probably be educating during a pandemic, hopefully a tail end and the end of it, but you know, the timelines, the projected forecast of what we're going to be living under is probably not going to be back to normal for whatever we do inside of our walls. The
Right.
default is not going to be back to normal across the country, I don't think. So what are the targets for addressing the fact that we have been educating under a pandemic for over a year by the time?
So when we put the budget together, the budget includes the staffing that we've kind of talked about. So having the counselors, having the you know, keeping the interface program going, looking at taking our grant funds, developing a robust summer program, tutoring program, moving forward to meet students' needs, who again may have fallen behind. You know, looking at our staffing, and someone mentioned a little earlier, I think Ken talked about this, several of you have, you know, a really defined staffing plan, not only for next year, but for the next following, you know, few years. You know, having some type of testing, I think, is probably going to be important until we have, until students are immunized. And again, that will probably not happen. I think Dr. Fauci said not until probably spring of 2022 is when child-ready immunization could actually occur. So again, those are items that we're going to have to incorporate all into the budget, which is what we're doing now. Some of this, and Malaya mentioned this, is really going to be dependent upon the funds coming in from the federal government. And, again, we line up what's going to be needed and where it's going to be needed. And that'll go along with this. So much of our budget right now is constrained to what we currently have. And what we're trying to do is continue to support our students through technology, our staff through PD, and then, ensuring that we have all of the items necessary to bring kids back into the building in terms of PPE, proper ventilation, all the different things with the buildings as well.
Okay, I have Malaya next.
Yep. So since you mentioned testing, I've sent you some questions on that, so I will not go through all of them. But relevant to the budget discussion, I think it is important to understand where we are with that, where we are heading with that. I know we were asked to do this other kind of testing before, the pooled testing, but most importantly, if the pooled testing is the goal, is that definitely coming through DESE? Have we looked at other funding? I know some districts have decided it's actually more cost effective to do that on their own than go through the DESE programs, and it's logistically less complicated because of different packages they've been able to arrange. And we are the biggest regional district in the state. So I would be curious to know if we've considered that kind of thinking or, collaborating with neighboring districts to do it, not doing through DESE. I just am curious cost-wise if we've looked at other options, or we're just doing what DESE is offering in the long term. If we're going to have this with us for the fall and however long, and I don't expect details on that at this exact moment, but I'd love if you could speak to that as it applies to the budget process.
Sure. So for the pooled testing, the one thing that we would not get if we didn't go with the state model would be 6 weeks worth of financial support for it. And pooled testing, ultimately, if we're talking about doing this in 13 schools, with the management associated with it, we actually have to bring on a body to oversee this. We don't have the staff to do it. And they recommend bringing someone on. They would provide that person. We'd have to pick up the costs toward the end of this school year, which we would be able to do. If we did this on our own, it would be much more expensive and much more challenging in terms of how the whole thing was laid out.
Well, I meant looking forward beyond the 6 weeks, because there will be costs beyond the 6 weeks. Obviously, the 6 weeks you want to use for free if you can, but beyond that 6 weeks, that's really what I was talking about, because that's what our budget is concerned about.
Yes. So again, what we have to do is we have to assess how much is actually going to cost. So the first thing we had to do is get through the rapid antigen testing. So get through that process, get everything here. Brendan has done a great job organizing that with the nurses and so forth. So now we can take this next step. They wouldn't even allow us to do anything until we had everything signed off. It was in our hands, and the nurses are actually trained, and then we can start the process.
So just again, I think we're at this point, this stage in the game, we're having a conversation as it respects budget planning for next year. So, it sounds like the specific question around, what's the potential or estimated costs around pool testing for next year? It sounds like the answer is we don't know yet.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, is not necessarily what we're doing now is relevant, but after the 6 weeks, how is this in our budget, and have we explored options to make sure we're getting the best services for the most cost-effective way possible? Since we have to decide in the next 2 weeks, basically, what we're doing for next year.
Daryl, anything to add to that?
No, I agree, Malaya. We're in a position where maybe not the next 2 weeks, but I think one of the things we have to do is think about what the options are moving forward, because again, we do know there will be some type of stimulus money coming in. So that's the other part that we need to also understand. That may be an area that we tap into.
Okay, I got Scott and Christina.
Yeah, it must be very difficult looking at this budget, Daryl, being so fluid with, if we are going to get another stimulus package. I know how much money we've received on the last one. And I know you have the virtual academy up there, and I know that might come with a cost. But if we don't do it in that survey that you're sending out tomorrow, and 10% of the kids at the high school level, middle school says, we prefer virtual, and they go an external route, and that's a lot of money that we would lose. So I'm glad you're looking at that, but if the survey comes back in 2 weeks, do we have any plans on moving forward with that to try, again, if it comes back with a high number of students saying, we want to stay virtual, thanks, no thanks, and if you don't offer something, we're going to go and leave the district. Can we put something together like that, or?
Yeah, I think we definitely have to look at that option, Scott. It makes no sense for us just to say, okay, go off and go to the Greenfield virtual high school program. I'd much rather, either define one within our own school system, and whether or not that plays out elementary, middle, and high, or just high, just middle and high. I'm not sure right now because we're not sure of the numbers. But if it's something where we're going to lose a dramatic amount of money, I'd much rather have those students who are here remain with us, and if we can do it, we're going to do it.
Okay, thank you.
I got Christina.
Thank you. Just on this section about pandemic related budget considerations, unfortunately, I think that this is going to take precedence in this little bit of money that we might even possibly have. And I know Malaya is talking about us being able to get reimbursed for some of it, but like you've all pointed out, we don't know what that would be. So in our planning, it seems that this is the most important component because in order to have students safely and teachers safely in the building, we need to have these things in place. With Malaya talking about the pool testing, I just encourage Daryl, if you could look at what Northborough, Southborough is doing. We have take-home kits for kids K through 12. I know the staffing component, they do have nurses that are coming in to help collect, but maybe some of the volunteers from that brigade of nurses and volunteers that offer to do contact tracing might be able to come do that to help take that from us. So that's a very important component of our ability to be in school safely. And the other items from what people said about making the tiers, I think that's probably, as you guys bring this back to us to look at, just the tiers sound like a great idea with the pandemic planning, and then tier 1 absolutely have to have, and then the different gradations, because we do have to keep, as Ken keeps reminding us, the needs of the towns in mind, where everyone's struggling. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. I was actually looking at that, the information that went out for Northborough, Southborough, Algonquin, and it's a really unique way of doing it, having the students test at home rather than do the swabs in the classrooms. So definitely something that I'm interested in as well.
And we do the same for teachers. We have take-home tests as well, and we just bring them back and scan them in. It's a really quick process to scan. Yeah. They do QR code, scan it, drop it off, and then it seems like a good program. But I'd encourage you to call the superintendent and ask him about it.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, Daryl.
Okay. Thank you. So again, one of the things we just wanted to quickly give you an overview of is just the proposed additions from 21 and then the proposed additions for 22 based upon our old staffing plan. And this is basically what we had put in there for last year. And this is what we had put in there based upon last year's, if everything had worked out the way we thought it might work out, and where we are with FY22. Again, all of this is going to be revamped. And then these are the actual staffing additions for 21. So as I mentioned, we had to hire full-time building subs just to support our teachers, our principals, in order to make sure that they weren't in a place where they didn't have coverage for classes. You know, we have a nurse leader, we still haven't hired yet. The guidance counselors, as I mentioned, we haven't hired yet. We did bring on 2 tech integration specialists. We brought on the assistant principal at Naquag, and we had to bring on 1 custodian for ECC because Again, we had a custodian, we still have one. We have one, and that person would work from 12 o'clock until 9 o'clock at night. So we needed someone for the morning for the safety purposes. In terms of grants, one of the things that we just wanted, and we've talked a lot about grants, but we've had 3 grants that have come through. So really the first one was Remote Learning Tech Essentials Grant, and that helped cover some of the costs associated with the Chromebooks and also the mobile hotspots that we've distributed to students and staff that didn't have access to the internet. We also had the first ESSER grant, which came out to be almost $177,000. And that included, what we ended up purchasing was Lexia Learning. So that's an expensive program, but it's a fantastic program for our elementary students. A lot of PPE and an awful lot of cleaning supplies as well. So those were our first 2 grants that came through. And then we had our school reopening grant. And again, these are all the different items associated with the $1.5 million that we have used this school year. So, anywhere from, the rest of the Chromebooks and hotspots to all the software and apps that we've been able to put out there for students and staff, to online textbook subscriptions, all the way to, paying for our bathroom partitions and plexiglass and overtime to cover our HVAC and facilities repairs. So those are all different items that we've been able to kind of tap into in terms of looking at the COVID, using the COVID relief grant fund money. So one of the things I'd also like to, and I've got a couple hands that just came up, so we'll do that. But then once I talk through that, what I did want to do, and Chair Dennis talked about this, we did consolidate this information into a Google form that Barry Sklar is going to be putting into the chat box. He'll put a link there for you. You'll be able to click on the link and go into it, and basically have the opportunity to, highlight the top 3 items that you think are the most important, and just share that. You can do that this evening. You can fill it out tonight, tomorrow if you like, so we don't have to pull it all together today and review it. But as soon as we have all that information back in, we can pull it together and share it with you, so you'll have access to it and you can look to see how it kind of pans out. But it looks like I have a couple of questions. I think Sherry had her hand up first.
Just briefly, the online textbook subscriptions, I'm assuming, are this year only?
Actually, no. So the way they work, when we purchase those, they're typically for multiple years. So they're like 3 to 4 years.
Okay, so we're covered for part of next year, at least for some of these things.
Yep, definitely.
And, cafeteria expenses, were they not covered under the FDA program with the free lunch? Or does that not cover all of our cafeteria?
No, it doesn't cover all the costs.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
I have Linda Long-Belil and then Ken.
So I saw early literacy on your list, which I very much appreciate because I think that's going to be critically important. But I didn't see something else I put on the survey, which was compensatory special education, which I think is going to be a major lift. I think that's really important and needs to be on there explicitly.
So that's a great point, Linda. I think one of the things we were looking at for compensatory services, I think that probably get tied back into summer school and those other kind of programs, because we were lumping those together in terms of what the cost would be to support students who have fallen behind. So we merged those together. So that is part of that overall information.
Right. I mean, it could certainly be, summer school could certainly cover a good chunk of it, but I mean, there could be any number of individualized kinds of interventions that need to be done that we are going to have to pay for. So have to support. So I think it should be on there explicitly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Ken?
Yeah, so just going back a few slides, I'm sorry, it kind of skipped by, but when we were talking about the positions that were proposed to be added in fiscal year 21,
yep.
And proposed additions in 22, I asked for and got, although it might have been through business and finance and not through the full committee, I don't really recall, the positions that were eliminated in fiscal year 21 that were originally in our budget. I think that's a piece we should be keeping in mind because it is creating a transition in what our funding priority is. Like we have 5 classroom teachers listed as proposed additions, but there were actually classroom teachers reduced, right? So I think that this would have been more informative if there was one more column of FUY 21 eliminations.
Right, and I think, you know, as we kind of go through this, you know, Jeff and I have talked about it. So we have our proposed additions based upon the staffing plan, and then we have our reductions, and then we have our actuals by the end. We can get that out to people. I believe Director Dede is going to be speaking to that tomorrow night at Business and Finance, and then we can send it out to everyone. Okay, were there any other comments or questions? I don't think there were. Barry, did you want to add the survey to the chat?
Yep, one second.
So Darryl, is it your intention to collect people's priority feedback now, or is it your intention to collect it after this meeting and report back at a later date?
I think in terms of the time frame, what we'll do is I'll collect it, and it doesn't have to happen now. It can happen later on, but I just want to share the link. Please fill it out at your convenience, and then share it back with us as soon as you fill it out. And Barry just put it up there, and then we can share the results with you when they're back in.
Okay. Darryl, did you have anything else from a presentation perspective that you were planning to go over today?
Well, those are the budget priority items. Are there any other
on this topic?
On this topic, I'm all set.
Okay. So between now and next week, which is our budget hearing, part of what I think what I'm hearing is a readout of not only the budget, but some of the underpinnings on staffing assumptions. I think I've heard some questions related to, you know, inherent is what is our assumptions around what the number of students are going to be, the operating model that we're going to be using, and then based on this discussion, feedback from what the committee has identified as priorities through this voting mechanism that you had, and what the feasibility of those priorities are. Anything else before we move on? I have Malaya, and then if anyone else has something before we move on to the next topic.
I had 2 things. One is directly related to the link you just sent us. Is there a deadline, like tomorrow morning perhaps, or something? Because I actually think if we don't, I don't want to take up time now, but if we were doing it now, we would all do it. And we only had 14 responses to the last survey. So is there a deadline by which you need this, hopefully soon?
Yeah, I'd love to have it finished by tomorrow.
Okay. So my second thing is actually kind of more of a comment, and I'm sure I'll get to it more tomorrow, Business and Finance, but in general, I guess there's a lot of pieces of missing information, and I'm a little concerned about that at this stage in the process. I am hopeful that they will get filled in, but there's a lot of questions that certain things may depend on pieces of information we don't have yet. So that is number one. And number 2 is that in this whole process, we're looking at our piece of things, but there's also a discussion, which hopefully we'll have next week at our budget hearing, about the state piece of this, and that there are some pieces of the town assessment that are totally beyond our control. They go up regardless of what we do. We lost students in some of our towns, but their assessment is going to go up anyways, even if we had a level budget, because the state has changed the way, had changed their calculations. And I think we need to also find ways to communicate that in our process, because it is not entirely up to us. And again, we got documents related to this that we'll talk about tomorrow, but, since Bob Levine was speaking to us, I know the past 2 years, Holden's assessment the minimum contribution has gone up $1 million the past 2 years before we even touch our assessments that we have control over, just coming from the state side of things. So I think we need to find a way to also emphasize that in our discussions going forward, because it's very frustrating, but it's beyond our control.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Malay, and again, when we're talking about the overall numbers and so forth, we've actually, from the October 1 count to now, we've gained 100 students, so we have 100 more students now.
Yeah,
So,
but we're still, I won't even get into all that today because it's honestly probably beyond
Yep.
what people want to hear about right now, and we'll probably get to it next week and tomorrow. But I mean, yeah, I won't even get into that. There's things in the state process that are actually costing us money
Yes,
in the
I
long
agree.
run, which is a more detailed discussion than you need right now. But I'm sure we'll get to it tomorrow and next week. But it's very frustrating and we can't control that. But even though we have lost students, some of our towns are still paying more money because of the way the state works things out. So it's, it's a complicated process.
All right, I have Matt next.
So this is just a comment on the link that was just shared with us for budget priorities. I'm looking at that and I'm just wondering how meaningful data can be determined from a response to that. And here's what I'm struggling with. I'm not going to respond to that because it's just a list of high-level items that don't give a budgetary impact. So for me to look at a prioritization and to see things like additional teachers, I don't know what that means, what the impact is educationally or to the budget. Everything on that list is additions. And when we're talking budget priorities, I think a lot of the discussion tonight was around a staffing plan of what is actual today versus what we've budgeted for, but we're not spending. So I just ask administration before sending out a survey like this to really quantify this, because if I asked you right now, what is the difference between district-wide professional development offerings, district-wide software licensing, or science and social studies curriculum from a budgetary impact perspective, and I polled the audience here, I don't think anybody would have an idea what the budgetary impact is of those. So for us to prioritize without knowing the data next to it, it's really not something you're going to be able to gain any meaningful action out of.
Yeah, so Matt, we basically took the information that was already out there and we didn't quantify because, again, when we were looking at the survey data that came in based upon the 5 domains, we didn't actually quantify what the dollar amounts might be because they weren't our, it wasn't our information we were putting there. It's your information. So I guess someone might have said teachers. So again, if details around, okay, where were they thinking, how many, those are the types of things that are a little more nebulous in terms of how that kind of plays out. If we were to look at this and say, okay, there are certain items on here that we really want to focus on, such as, science and social studies curriculum. Okay, that's an area that we want to ensure that we're not going back into textbooks and saying, okay, this might be an area that we need to reduce because we don't have enough funds. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. What I'm struggling with is just mathematically 3 choices per person, 63 choices total, and there's 30 choices on a list. You're not going to get any meaningful data that you can make a decision on outside of 4 people pick this one, 5 people pick this, 6 people pick that. But we're picking just based upon what we perceive that to be without any specific impact. And it just seems like a futile exercise that doesn't really drive how we move forward with a budget in 2 weeks. And that's really where we have to move here rather than very high level. We need to have specific financial data.
Okay.
I mean, we say continue hiring. Can I just give an example? Sorry, Mike.
No, I think we got the point, Matt. And what I'll share with you is that I think we're at a place where we're meeting the administration where they are. And so at this stage of the game, we've gone through a process where we've given the membership an opportunity to identify our priorities, and they're all across the board. And we spent, a little over an hour talking about what those priorities are and what the range of those things look like. What we don't know, and what I think would be hard to anticipate, is to apply a cost when we're not quite sure we know what they are, right, or assign a value yet. But what we have shared in common is this discussion of what those things mean to the best of our ability. So, do I think that there could be some value in having the committee vote and identify, even though they are general, would it give us some information on what seems to be the general priorities based on the discussions that we've had? Yes. Do that formulaic, and does it end there? No, because the feedback that we need is what's feasible. I understand that, we're all going to have a different idea of adding teachers. It is kind of a nebulous item that's on there in the way that that was constructed onto the questionnaire. I would have liked to have been able to vote on some of the specific suggestions that were made as we've gone through them. But having said that, I think part of what the administration is trying to collect here is what of all the different things that we've talked about, what does the committee prioritize most highly? And then they need to give us feedback on whether or not some or all of those things. And it's not an all or none response, right? It may be that there's some aspect of it that they can do in the short term and under this budget. It may be that many of these things need to have a longer term perspective. But that's my take. All right, we got a few other people have their hands raised. We have Mike, Mike, and then Krista, if I have this right.
So I don't see a huge value in this, but I'm not going to harp on that too much on the survey that we're doing. But I'm under the impression, and I'd like someone to either confirm or deny, that at this point in the process, we're looking at things that would be nice to have. We haven't quite gotten to the cutting down yet, although it's a bit concerning that we only have 2 weeks and we haven't got down to the getting our passing what we need and taking care of what we already have from last year as opposed to additions. But I understand that this is a kind of where we are in the process, correct? All right. Thank you.
Yeah, it is, Mike. Yeah.
And Krista?
Again, with the survey, I did open that right up, and I do have a couple. I don't know, a couple questions. I always say a couple, but it's probably just one big one. I'm noticing that when reading this, there are several items on here that are basically the same. So if we're saying that and we're supposed to be choosing what, like three off of this list, I just don't think that's helpful, because I could choose 4 right now that are the same thing, and I feel like the list was put together in a way that didn't combine things in an intelligent way that would give us, a group. This goes with this. This is what you're saying here, and it's basically the same as this. This is what we need. For example, restoring positions, additional staff, additional counselors, and administrative staff. Like, that's all within staffing and needing the correct staff in the right areas, right? So those are 4, and I'm sure that I can find more in there that are combined with that. And I just feel like maybe, yes, you need this information, but is there a way, because you've had several comments about this list so far, is there a way that maybe you could put it together, make sure that the areas that we even talked about tonight are combined in a way that we can address that by putting a check mark and saying, yes, this, I want this, and we know that this goes under all of these, or all of these things go with this heading.
So Krista, when we put the list together, we were trying to be as, again, I wasn't trying to narrow it down to 5 different items or 6 different items, because I wanted to ensure that people, at least, we did our best, which is why I reviewed everything so thoroughly under the 5 domains before with all of you. So then you'd be able to look at this list after and be able to say, okay, and I do understand, but when we're talking about staffing, if it's just staffing, or are we looking at staffing of administrators? Are we looking at counselors? Are we looking? So there are layers associated with that. So again, that's why we pulled that out there. I think what we can then do once this information is pulled together is really assess and kind of pull it together into those different groupings after the fact. And then we can come back to you and say, hey, here's what happened. We had 5 people say this. We had 7 people say this. We had 14 people say this. And I think that helps tie everything together ultimately. Again, I think a couple people have mentioned this. This is we're trying to really hit the heavy priorities so that we can say, here are the places where we want to be able to maintain. If we get to add, fantastic. But I want to be able to ensure that we're at least focusing as an entire group on the areas that we feel are the most important for us to support moving forward.
All right, I have Linda Long-Balil.
Yes. Do I understand that the link was sent out during the meeting? Is that right?
Yes, it was, Linda. It's in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat. Okay. All right. I didn't see it in my email. So, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Carl?
Just real quick, might just be helpful instead of just limiting people to 3, maybe go with like 5 or 6, just with spreading out over 30. You would,
sure,
especially to Matt's point, you might get some better clarity on that.
Yeah, we could definitely up that up a little. Yeah, bring that up to 5. I don't think that's an issue.
I can do that right now if you want me to.
Yeah, thank you, Barry.
And if you've already submitted, you can go back in and edit.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments on budget priorities? Well, yeah.
Super fast. Well, it's really super fast, and you can't change this, but if we did this again, perhaps a ranked option would have been easier, because that would have given you qualitative data to go from and get an average that way instead of just how many people picked which one. So I'm not expecting you to necessarily redo it, but if you decide in 10 minutes you want to scrap the whole thing, that might get you a different kind of data that may be more useful in the future. And also why a data person might be helpful.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to plan to increase in-person learning for this school year. Turn that over to you, Darryl.
Muted.
Darryl, you're on mute.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is just, again, present my screen. And I've got to go back to this first. So I put this in my report, and I shared this with families in my weekly newsletter this week that I'm hoping all of you received. So over the past week and a half, Commissioner of Education and the Governor have both really pushed for in-person learning to occur full-time for all K-5 students starting in the week of April. So I had the opportunity to sit in on a conference call with Commissioner Riley Thursday afternoon. And he basically said that what he will be doing is going to the Board of Education either later this week or next week to basically give him the right to no longer count hybrid and remote models as structured learning hours. So taking that away from schools, and then, it would really force schools to reopen completely at the K-5 level. His reasoning behind moving forward was really around the lowering of the numbers throughout the Commonwealth and ultimately the country, as well as all the strong mitigation strategies that have been put in place. So he really feels as though this is an area that all schools can eventually go in. One of the things that precipitated this was actually the relaxing of the ridership restrictions for student transportation. So that just came out, I believe, on February 11th. And basically, students can basically ride the bus as they did before. So unless you're in a school district that is considered high risk, you can put as many students on a bus and or a van as you wish. So,
Dr. McCall, do you want me to take a minute and talk about
special ed. Yeah, actually, if you could, Chris, a little bit about the special ed piece with the vans.
Sure. Maybe you'll get a drink of water. You must be exhausted. There's a lot of talking happening on your end.
Okay.
So I just, I wanted to let folks know that given the release of restrictions or some of the restrictions on the vans, we will be increasing our van ridership and redoing the routes for the special education vans. That means that the AA transportation company they've already worked on this, and they will be in touch with families individually, and new van schedules will begin on March 15th, where we will be able to put, again, more students on the vans. So the van restrictions that were lifted were the number of students on the vans and the social distancing on the vans. The restrictions that will remain in place are windows and vents will remain open as appropriate. Everyone who's able to will be expected to wear a mask. Hand sanitizing should occur before boarding, and we know that that does happen on the school end, and we hope that it continues to happen on the home end. Students may have assigned seats, most likely will, particularly on the vans. Daily cleaning and weekly deep cleaning will continue. And of course, significant deep cleaning happens if there is a case. We'll continue to use our installed car seats that we have in place currently. And again, a letter will be coming home and a phone call to individual families to let them know if their individual students' van assignment or van time has changed. And again, our expected start date for the new routes, which I know we've been through this many, many times together through our phased reopening, the new routes would begin on March the 15th. And if you have any questions, please, either if the committee has any questions now, please direct them to me, or if we have any additional concerns from the community, please reach out to me and let me address those concerns. Thank you, Dr. McCall.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate you jumping in there. The other large part of a discussion that we had with the commissioner last week was really the concept of social distancing at the 6-foot level all the way down to the 3-foot level. He continues to stress, and he did continue to stress that doctors here in Massachusetts are pushing this as well. They really want kids in school, and the 6-foot to 3-foot distancing is very appropriate. And again, that's only in places where masks are to be worn. So cafeterias will continue to be at 6 feet. And again, that's a time when students have to take their masks off to eat to begin with. So planning steps to increase in-person learning. So since we have brought students back here in Wachusett for hybrid learning, some of the mitigation strategies that we've used has been, we've been able to maintain 6 feet of physical distancing in almost all learning environments. We have required mask wearing. We've followed hand hygiene protocols. We've had spatial barriers put up throughout bathrooms and in front of offices, desks, and office chairs, following detailed cleaning protocols that have been put in place. We have CO2 monitors, we have airflow meters in all the schools, and ensuring that ventilation systems are providing 4 or more air changes per hour. And we have been vigilant about keeping track of that. And, more planning steps to increase in-person learning. So transitioning students from the elementary schools from hybrid to full in-person will really require us to do a couple things. One will be, we'll have to shift from 6 feet of distance in most classrooms to between 6 feet and 3 feet. There are classrooms where we can still keep 6 feet of distance because there are either a smaller number of students in the classroom, or it's a larger classroom. But there are places where we will not be able to do that, and that's what we're looking at right now. So over the next week or two, we'll actually be assessing this. We do have schools that have done this already, where they've pulled together what it would look like in a classroom, what would be required in terms of desks and so forth. So we're looking at classrooms. We're also looking at cafeterias where we do have to keep social distancing at 6 feet when they're not wearing their masks. DESE did say that they're going to update some guidance for all schools around that within the next few weeks. And again, that's a concern of all superintendents, teachers, parents, I think, in terms of maintaining that distance. And the other thing that we will be doing is sending a survey out to families so that we're able to assess which families are planning to return to full in-person learning. So, again, a start date, we'd love to be able to start in the month of April. That would be our goal right now, because again, we don't have a specific date at this time because we're still looking at how we can ultimately bring students back in and, safely do it in a way that allows them to eat in the cafeteria. So it's really a logistical issue in terms of planning this out right now. DESE and the Board of Education, they will be providing more guidelines and information to school districts soon. And, we're all very excited about this opportunity to have students back in the building. And it was nice to hear Mary Shepard, president of the WREA, talk about that earlier on during the public comment. I know I had the opportunity to speak with teachers last Thursday at a town hall that we held, and we talked about this process. We talked about how it might work, and I think people are very excited about returning to some sense of normalcy in some form or fashion. The other thing that we would continue to do is offer up the remote learning model for those students in cohort C that aren't, that don't want to, come back. They still want to remain out of school for the time. That's, again, that is something we're able to do. It's something that the state is allowing us to do for the remainder of the school year. The survey that we'll send out to families, again, that will determine if any cohort C students would like to shift to full in-person model when available. And, ultimately, one of the things that the commissioner did mention on his phone call the other day was that we're probably not going to be allowed to have remote learning as it stands right now in any of our school districts. Again, one of the things that we've been able to do, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, Binex testing, and this goes along, this is a first step in the pool testing. These are actually the testing kits that were in Brendan's office the other day. This is not him doing it. This is a stock photo, but this is what it looks like. And in terms of the Binex testing now, this is it's a rapid antigen test administered with a nasal swab. Testing's optional. All the tests were delivered last week. School nurses are going to be trained this week. We expect the program to happen very soon, hopefully by next week. And this is really the first step in the pooled testing. As I mentioned a little earlier, DESE will continue to pay for pooled testing as long as we start prior to April 18th. We had to start the Binex testing first, and we're now looking at the feasibility of how pooled testing can be conducted during these next several weeks. So that's where we're at right now with our reopening for the spring.
Thank you, Darryl. So there's a couple of hands that are raised in the chat. I did want to mention or ask. So the topic tonight is the plan to increase in-person learning. We did not receive a plan tonight. I hear that I hear you that you have aspirations for some sort of return at the beginning of April that generally aligns with the commissioner's plan for K-5. What we haven't heard is whether or not this is a phased approach, whether it impacts some or all students, and under what circumstances. So I guess I'd like to know, by when can this committee expect to receive a plan for in-person learning for this school year?
Sure, Mike. So after we've kind of gone through all this, and again, I wanted to review this with everyone. We want to ensure that we are moving through the right process with the elementary schools. So I would like to say either by next Monday or the following Monday, you'll have a plan for the remainder of the year. Again, one of the things we're doing is we're looking at middle schools and elementary schools right now, where we're again, the cafeteria does become an issue. Director Didi and I have been talking about tents, utilizing tents outside for lunches and so forth. As the weather gets a little nicer, it gives us a little more flexibility. So I'd probably say in a week or two, you'll have a plan laid out that will give us some more details about how this is going to work out. Again, some of this is dependent upon how the numbers play out. Some of this is dependent upon how this is going to work in some of the different schools. But ultimately, I'll give you a more defined plan of action next week or the week after.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that if we have aspirations, and the commissioner has aspirations for us to return at the beginning of April, it really needs to be on the low end of that range that you gave us. So something that we should plan for our agenda for next week. I have Sherry and then Linda.
Okay, first to what you just said, please don't survey these parents before we have a plan in place. To ask them if they're going to bring their kids back or keep them home before we know how they're doing it is not right. I just want to clarify too, when you were talking about buses, I thought that you said we can put on as many as we want. Is that correct?
They basically lifted the requirements, Sherry.
Completely.
Yeah. I mean, so when you look at it, so for elementary, they've lifted the requirements completely. So they've taken them away. As long as you're following, and Christine
Only for elementary.
Well, the mitigation. But for middle and high, if you are in a situation where you're not in a high-risk district, you can still put those kids on the bus. I'm not as concerned about that right now, because again, the focus is to get the K-5 students in. Okay.
My other thing, I really didn't have a great understanding of what the spacing looked like in the classrooms. I'm a visual person, and this past week I went to Naquag, I went to Glenwood, and I went to Central Tree to look and see what's going on and to talk to the principals about how they felt about the plans for possible reopening and where they thought they needed help, and where they thought they're succeeding and where they're having trouble with coming up. As far as spacing is concerned, they feel, in Rutland, they feel good about what they can do to bring everybody back, and that goes up to the 8th grade level. I know that DESE is putting forth K-5, but I don't see why we can't go K-8, at least in from a Rutland perspective. I haven't talked to the other schools. As far as lunch is concerned, they feel the same way, and personally, from the high school perspective, I haven't talked to Principal Biando, but right now they're not having lunch there anyway. So if we can get them back in the classroom, until lunch, send them home and do what they're doing similarly, but 5 days, I don't see why we shouldn't do that.
Thank you. Linda Woodland?
So I have two kind of sets of questions, two topic-wise. So I hope both are addressed. But the first one is a question about that survey, because, from a facilities point of view, I think that a lot of what we do for reopening depends on the physical constraints of our buildings. So knowing what the demand on the building is, I think we have a chicken or an egg situation when it comes to surveying the parents, to be honest. Because the more kids you put in, the less you can do 6 feet of distancing. And I want to reiterate very strongly that DESE and the state are going against CDC requirements or guidelines for 6 feet of distancing, even with schools. The CDC updated guidance also included that community risk is tied to successful school openings. So I am very hesitant to to say that yeah, sure, we can go down to 3 feet in some instances, or we can go down to 5 feet in some instances, when the CDC is extremely consistent that say 6 feet minimum while masked, while indoors. So I just want to make sure that that's stated clearly, because DESE is not following CDC information. So that's part of it. I'd also recommend that, and actually I would like to make sure that the survey that's going out for parents, for the remote parents, does it detail that there might be times when their kids would be closer than 6 feet apart? Is that specifically in the survey? Because that's key information.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last question is about the Binex testing, because it was my understanding that it's only to be used on symptomatic people. But if you're symptomatic, what are you doing in school? So what is the point? What is the point of this testing? I have to be blunt. And why wouldn't we just go straight to pool testing otherwise, outside of what the state provides? Because it's such a racket.
So, and again, we didn't pay for this, but this was something that we had to do in order to be eligible for the pool testing. So the state makes you jump through certain hoops in order to do this. And Dr. Keenan, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, just that it does have value because people do develop symptoms during the day that they don't have in the morning when they come in, and it actually happens pretty frequently. So it at least will provide us, to go to your analogy, Member Woodland, a layer of Swiss cheese in our layers here to provide another level. So I do understand what you're saying, but there are a lot of cases where people do come in and develop symptoms.
I guess I would just, well, I can ask you more outside of the meeting, but I was looking through the requirements and what's publicly on DESE's page about the pool testing. I'm having a hard time following this requirement of having the Binex first. So, but be that as it may, thank you for answering my questions.
All right, I got Laura.
Thank you. I just have a question, just a recommendation, that when we survey parents, if we could also add a question about their remote families, about their willingness to return their students to school with or without a vaccine. So we can also sort of kill two birds with one stone to find out what their intentions may be for the fall, so that we don't have to redo another survey. We can make adequate plans for next fall, knowing that some of these families are not sending their kids until a vaccine is available for their kids. And so I just like to know the numbers for that, so that we can make a plan for what that might look like in the fall.
Sure.
All right, I got Malia.
All right. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, my computer weird. So, Member Woodland did mention one thing I was going to mention, so I will skip that part. But I have two questions. The first is that I will reiterate, because it just sounds, from the testing slides you just showed us, it looks like we have a plan for the 6 weeks of the the rapid testing, the Binex testing we're doing, but we don't have a definite plan for pool testing after that, although we are hoping we will. So I guess I will reiterate that we need a plan for the pool testing, because even the commissioner has said that pool testing is available, and that's one of the things that makes us safe. And if we don't have a definite plan for pool testing beyond 6 weeks from now, then we have a problem before the school year is up. So we need to figure that out, one way or the other. My other comment, though, is regarding I have a quick question. Does the commissioner have a plan for if the board does not approve this authority that he's requesting? Has he talked about that? He's just assuming it'll be good, and okay.
Yes.
I think it's important to clarify, because the Attorney General has also raised questions about his authority to do so, and they have to sort that out. but it's not a done deal until they have the meeting and he gets granted the authority that he assumes he has. So for the public perception, I think it's important to note that, although we're assuming and we're trying to plan ahead as if it will get approved. But my bigger concern is that in the CDC guidance, which the 6 feet has already been pointed out, because that's all over that document. If you read that entire document, it is based on assumptions around, there are 3 or 4 things around community transmission and most of our state is considered high transmission areas according to the CDC document, regardless of what the state says. And there are specific, and hopefully that will change, but there are specific guidelines in there that the state guidance is currently in conflict with. There's specifics about whether you have athletics, which our state's not addressed at all. There's specifics about distancing. There's specifics about testing. But the distancing is really the biggest thing that's throughout the document. And I am in favor of certainly bringing students to school. I've advocated for it since April. So I certainly am in favor of that. But I currently have a bit of a conflict with the fact that our state is saying, I mean, how can you have 6 feet distancing in the cafeterias, but not the rest of the day? Like there's some conflicts and they're picking and choosing which data. So I guess from our perspective, I want to make sure that we are fully considering the whole picture and how to keep our students safe and everything in that document, not just the headline. Because the truth is, if you look at the detail of it, this virus has not gone away, and hopefully it will drop and we will be in a more flexible category in a couple of weeks, even than when it was released last week. But there are things that the state has not addressed, and I hope in the forthcoming guidance they might, because I certainly think it's a positive thing, but we just need to make sure that we're following that. And, you know, some of it's out of our control, but some of it's not. And the fact is the state does not agree. The state guidance currently does not agree with everything in the CDC document. So from our safety perspective, I want to make sure we don't overlook that and pick and choose. Just because I remind you of when DESE opted not to close schools last year on the first day. Took them a week to close schools across the state, even though every district in the state had. There was a conflict. So I think we're ultimately responsible for the safety of our students. And hopefully we can find a way to do this, because I certainly think it's a positive thing. But I think we need to, I see one of our members rolling his eyes. I don't appreciate that. I really think that we need to just be cognizant of our safety of our students, and that there have been times in this history that DESE has not made decisions in the beginning that are in the best interest of students. They've left them up to the districts. And now they're trying to make one, which is fine, but we are still responsible for the safety of our students. So I just don't want to overlook those things in considering where we go.
Thank you. Let's move on to Melissa.
Hi. I just have, I think, 3 things. The first one is I have huge concerns, of course, about the 3-foot distancing. Kind of just on the side note, I saw the New York Times today about a simulation on air circulation, and it was so disturbing in a full classroom, the amount of breaths in the air, even with ventilation put in place. It's overwhelming. People with masks on, it's just, I have really big concerns about the 3-foot distancing whole class. And that leads me into saying, I would not support people going full in person again until the teachers and the staff are at least vaccinated. I think that's only fair. And I was really blown away that I think it was Mary Shepard had mentioned that the teachers are in favor of full in person during public comment. I was curious as to how that came to be, that why are they in favor right now of full in person? That was really kind of blew me away, considering there's no vaccination date or anything for teachers and staff. And we're already having trouble staffing schools still, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, it's not quite as bad, Melissa, as it was a couple of weeks ago. We're actually in a much better place. But I can tell you that I sent a letter off to our local representatives, state representatives, this week, just basically asking them to put teachers and staff at the forefront in terms of getting them vaccinated ASAP. I mentioned that today at my Board of Health meeting, when I met with the 5 towns, just said, if there is any way that you have any influence over this, we really need to get kids back in school. And I think it would just help, teachers. I think it would help staff to just feel better about having that immunization prior to, again, getting into the classroom with students. They're already there. I think that's part of it, Melissa. They're already in the classroom with students coming through. So it's just more students. And I did see that simulation last night. I looked at it. I went through and watched the entire thing. Yeah. And, if people, it's definitely worth watching because it just shows the different layers and how everything breaks down. It's a really nice kind of 3D visual.
Are the teachers more so looking to do full in person because the hybrid remote whole thing is just burning them out? Or are they just throwing their hands up and saying, let's just get back into class because this is just so much right now?
And I think that's probably part of it. I think people just want a level of normalcy that would be really nice to have. And I think people are just, we've been doing this now for a year or so, and I think it's a challenge right across the board. So I think the faster people feel like, okay, can we get back to some sense of normalcy? Kids are still going to have to wear masks. We're still going to have to do hand hygiene. We're still going to have to do, follow all the different mitigation strategies, but it'll look different when everyone has their shots.
And my last thing, one more thing, as I haven't spoken at all. I just wanted to mention having a huge concern not offering a remote program. I know it's not all on you, Dr. McCall, but maybe this is more a Christine answer, but is that kind of borderline discrimination doing that? Is following the Disabilities Act for kids or families, more so kids, because of compromised immune systems, not being able to physically be there because they'll die possibly if they were to ever get COVID? I know kids, it's low, not all kids fall in that category though. I mean,
immunocompromised students you're talking about. Yeah. So and again, I'm not sure how that would play out, Melissa. I think it's ultimately something.
I would suggest that individual plans are always considered for individual students. So that would go through a 504 plan or an IEP plan for students. So even before COVID, we had students that were medically compromised that are home and are educated at home. So these are things that we do in special ed already, and it's all done individually.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have Carl next.
All right, so I had a couple things. One of them Sherry hit on, with especially in regards to the logistics of lunch, and it may be that we just have to adopt something like we have at the high school. It's kind of like a 3/4 day. Question I also had, and I don't know if there's an answer, but if we have classrooms where even going from 6 feet to 3 feet, we still can't fit all the desks. So like I was doodling up sketches of classrooms, and like a 3x4, you cut it down, you can only get 4x5 because the desks take up space. And so like, I don't know if we even have classrooms where, even if we were to say we want to bring everyone in, we wouldn't even have enough space at 3 feet. And so we would have to come up with some kind of hybrid in that case. And I don't even think the commissioners kind of touched on that either. So that's just, it's probably more at the high school, I would suspect, but maybe some of our elementary or middle schools, maybe.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Carl. It's the high school. Well, if we were to have students come back where we have 27, 28 kids in the class, and those classrooms are smaller in the high school than they are in most of the other buildings. So again, that would be an issue for us. I know we'd run into that. Of course, we do have a lot of kids. If we had a lot of those 11th and 12th graders who are currently remote say, hey, you know what, I want to come back to full in person, that would be a challenge. If they stay remote, that wouldn't be as much of a challenge, and we could probably roll through a little easier. So as Sherry said, she'd really like to say, okay, how do we get these kids in elementary, middle, and high? I look at a place like Mount View. Mount View could get the kids in at the in the classrooms, but getting 800 kids through lunch, that's the challenging part. And the other thing we didn't talk about is our cafeterias have desks in them right now. That's what they're sitting at for lunch because they can't sit at tables. So once we bring kids back in, all those desks have to go back into the classrooms, and we have to figure out, okay, how how are we going to sit them at tables and still keep them distance? So it's so multi-layered, and that's one of the things that we're looking at.
So, and then just a couple other things real quick. We've talked a lot about remote. Just want to ensure that when the plan to bring everyone back in the building comes out, we're still going to have folks that are going to be staying remote the rest of the year. And it's going to be a bit of a change because that teacher that has 10 kids in front of them now has 20 kids in front of them, and they still have to manage those twice the number in front in their classroom, as well as still providing the education for everyone who's remote. And so there's going to be some more changes and some adjustments with that. And then just the final note, I mean, as we've talked before, and as you mentioned, and while certainly there's concerns about variances between what the CDC says and what DESE has said, and maybe the commissioner has the authority, maybe he doesn't, but we absolutely need to plan for this, because if it doesn't happen, then we still have the plan and we can still kind of implement it. But if we don't, and then it comes to pass, then we're behind the 8 ball again. And so, and then as you mentioned with advocating, as the director of the CDC has said that vaccinations aren't required for educators, it's really in their best interest, and really everyone's best interest, that we continue to push for that, especially now that we have one more vaccine that's added to our repertoire, and a single shot one at that. And so certainly definitely want to keep advocating for them to get them, especially, I mean, if Johnson & Johnson, quick, that's one shot, and then they're already starting to build up. So definitely continue with that.
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Carl.
All right, I got Mike Pentis.
Please do not send parents another frickin' survey. I would emphasize that maybe as an alternative, you could put a link on a website to a survey. Parents do not want to fill out more surveys. My other point, other states have been full in person for months. Let's stop acting like we can't do this. Thank you.
So, Mike, the only thing I'm going to say about not doing a survey is, in order for us to gain the information around specific kids and whether or not they're coming back, that's how we do it. And it would work through Power School. So they would actually go into Power School, they'd fill it out, would get the information. If I don't do it that way, then it's just going to be a guesstimate as to kids coming back, who might come back in, planning classes and so forth. So it's much more challenging to not do it.
All right. Please be considerate of frustrated parents. Thank you.
All right, I got Ken.
Real quick, when you update the plan that Mike asked for, please update the remote plan for those kids so parents know what they're anticipating, kind of to follow on Carl. And secondly, just because we can't have full remote next year, I don't think the commissioners ever said we can't have necessarily some subset of a remote option. Clearly, we can't just be full remote, but let's make sure that we're clear in our language about what the commissioner says we can or can't do next year. Like, I think remote academies could be possible, fully remote, not so much.
Sounds good.
Linda Long-Balil.
Yes, two things just quickly. I understand that parents are feeling survey fatigue, but I certainly understand also that there really is no other good way to get the information that is needed for planning. So another survey is necessary. Secondly, something I've been wondering about for a while is why can't kids eat in the classrooms? Could you explain that? Or is that a possibility?
Yeah, so let's just say we're in classrooms and we have, it's going to be challenging to fit kids in a classroom and still have 6 feet of distancing in between kids. So we'd have to move it closer. And then once we move closer, we can't have the kids taking their masks off and eating.
I guess one thought I had was, could some of the kids go to the cafeteria and some of the kids stay in the classroom? I guess that was a thought that I had.
Yeah, that could be a way to, again, that can be a way to do it. And then we have to look at how we staff that, because again, what we typically do is everyone comes into the caf and we've got an administrator and maybe one other person. They're typically maybe 2 people, at best 3 people watching a cafeteria filled with kids. Teachers eat their lunch while the kids have lunch, so they have their, so it's a balancing act.
Okay.
We talked about that as well, Linda.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I have Matt.
I just want to make sure I heard something right. It sounded like earlier we were talking about increasing the amount of students on buses starting March 15th. Did I hear that accurately?
Vans.
Okay, so with that, I would presume that that would mean that we are going to use fewer vans if we're adding. So are we looking at bringing more kids back to school March 15th, or are we, what's the impact of that? Are we looking at a financial savings? I guess my question is, why are we putting more kids on vans on March 15th if the end result is not putting more kids in school?
Matt, right now we have over 100 students, special education students, that are not using the vans. And we're running more vans than we ran last year. So we're hoping to get back to the number of vans that we ran last year. And right now, if you talk to some families that are using the vans, you'll find that they're either too tight in between the runs because they're just spread too thin. And so by readjusting the routes and we will get closer to more accurate start and stop times and a more regular schedule for them and hopefully back to the proper number of vans that we should be running as more families come back to the vans.
Does this provide an opportunity to bring back another subset of students on the 15th? Are we freeing up resources here?
That's potentially that could happen, or we may be able to respond to other families that come in for cohort D. But I'm not exactly sure yet. We haven't seen this is the first time the public is hearing about about the changes to transportation. So we'll see if our special education families, if more families opt into using transportation or if they opt, in fact, out of using transportation.
Yeah, I would just, my feedback would be if we do see this as an opportunity where resources freed that can be leveraged, I think as you look at bringing kids back, we had an original plan that had a gradual return. And my fear is that we get to a place of April 15th and we now just want everybody to come back without really having a gradual way of looking at it where we're going to be most successful and where there might be more or less opportunity to be as going back to normal, where we have to Linda's point, where we have to look at a classroom and say, half the kids are going to go to their special at this time while half are going to eat lunch, or vice versa. I think that we have to look at it creatively from the perspective of what looks as an opportunity right away and what has there's more complexity around it, because as we know, we've got 13 different buildings or what have you in 5 different towns, and there's probably opportunity to move some back sooner rather than later based upon preparedness.
Okay. Christina Smith. Christina, are you still there? All right. Sherry Haber, you have a point of information to the chair.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, this is Christina. Can you hear me now or no?
Yeah. Yep, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Can I go now? Oh, all right.
Good.
Sorry, I had my speaker muted and didn't realize it. So I agree with what Member Lavoie was just saying about thinking outside of the box and creativity. However, I'm thinking about the lunchtime and what Member Longbelial was asking about, and I just see that riddled with problems. Talk about complexity, supervision issues, trash issues, students getting their lunch versus buying their lunch, rodents, pest problems that couldn't come up. Those are all kinds of problems that we might have. Allergies, hand washing. I just think there's so much to look at with the lunch component. Also, I think our cafeterias and our gyms usually have better HVAC because they hold more people. And so I'm concerned about the droplets in the room, like, and what would happen after eating, and that there wouldn't be time for those to kind of clear out while kids go back to class in that room. With the buses, gosh, this is just so confusing with what the commissioner has done with this. Here we are talking about a 3 to 6 feet in the classroom. The bus, it's like all bets are off. And even though the window's open, that's going to make it better. I'm concerned about making sure that we have assigned seating on these buses, especially for increasing capacity. For I know we talked about that with the vans and such, but on our big larger buses as well, that we need to make sure that we're being very careful about that in case we have an outbreak, so that we can control that. Again, that pooled testing is going to be really important to us. Thank you.
So Christina, I'll just jump in real quick. I did meet with the building principals last Friday. I met with the elementary principals and the 2 K-8s, and we talked through just the busing, with more students on, with the contact tracing that would have to take place. So we're working with AA Transportation, making sure everything is set in terms of having assigned seats, because again, bringing more kids on there, we have to have assigned seats. It's been easy because we do have video, which allows us to basically kind of not have to worry about that as much when we have had to do this a couple of times, but it's still a long, drawn out process. So that will happen. I agree on the pooled testing. It's, definitely something that we're, looking at, putting out there. The Binex testing, again, as I think someone mentioned, it is something that is only for adults and for kids. Because again, because we've had adults get sick in the middle of the day in our district. So same thing, they could go down, get a swab real quick and kind of find out what's going on. It will ultimately be helpful, but we're going to continue to kind of push the pooled testing possibility as well.
With that Binex testing, Daryl, they have to then follow that up with a PCR test, right? It's just, just that antigen testing. With the cafeteria lunches at the high school, and they're probably doing this at the elementary level and middle where they're eating lunch. But I mean, we'd also need assigned seating for that component, that would be challenging. I'm sure you've already thought of the complexity there as well.
Exactly.
All right. Malia, we got you for a quick hand.
Yep. I have a very quick question as we're going through these scenarios for this year, and I'm sure when you get to the ones for the fall, why has our reopening task force not reconvened to consider some of these issues? Because a lot of this, particularly lunch at the high school, for example, I know that they talked about and had plans for every building and a lot of scenarios such as this. And I think we need to build on that data, particularly when we're short on time. So I'd hope that the administration will tell us that perhaps they are reconvening shortly, and we can utilize that information.
Yep, they're meeting next week. So Brendan is sending that out either later tonight or tomorrow. We talked about it the other day, and that's going out, and then we'll be meeting with them, Brendan and I.
Okay. I had one, I think, relatively quick question, and that is, given that half the high school students have not come back, they're staying remote, what would be stopping us from having their hybrid sessions be a full day instead of a half day, starting, say, as early as Monday?
So there wouldn't be, the issue is finding out whether or not those students that are fully remote would want to come back. So what we'd have to do is kind of take, again, gauge whether or not they're going to come back. That's going to make it, that will play a role because of the size of the classrooms that we're looking at. Principal Biendo and I talked about this last week. If we can get those, again, gauging that, that will allow us to make, a more informed decision, Mike.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure why we would need to do that. It would seem to me that is an early adjustment that could be made right away while you're in the process of determining the longer return to school plan for this year, and get immediate benefit from those who are attending.
Again, what we'll do is, we're in the process of, talking through that right now. And if there's a way for us to do it for those students, we'll do that as well.
All right. Seeing nothing else for increase for student learning, the next item we had was vision for model school year for 2021-22.
Sure. So again, I will quickly present my screen. So really the vision for next year for September is for all students to be back full in-person learning. With the continued mitigation strategies that we put in place that are recommended by DESE, all the different things that we're doing around PPE, hand washing, air circulation, and so forth. So again, what we'll do is we'll assess how our spring reopening goes. As we kind of go into this process, we'll gather feedback from administrators, teachers, families, and students to really inform planning around the fall. And then we're going to work with our reopening task force. As Malaya, asked about, our first meeting will be on the 22nd of actually, is it? I don't think it's 3/22. I think it's supposed to be next week. So that's the wrong date. Additional plans for 21-22. So we're going to continue to monitor network demands and expand for the infrastructure and internet connection as needed, because again, we're still going to be dealing with some remote aspect of what we're doing. Provide additional equipment, applications, and software as needed. We'll provide training to staff in the form of PD, workshops, district-funded courses, individualized instruction, especially with our instructional coaches, and begin the process developing our next strategic plan. Those are the main areas that we're really looking at to move forward for next year. So the vision for September is to have students in school, in place. My understanding is that because there will not be there will not be an immunization for children yet. I don't think that's probably happening until 2022. Students would still be required to wear masks. We'd still be washing hands. There would still perhaps be some type of social distancing in place. And we'd continue to go through a process where school probably looked maybe 85% normal, 80% normal, but students would all have the capacity to be in school all day long.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this topic? Christina?
Just on the last comment about the 85% normal kind of thing, that school would look like that. I guess one of just being we all know that I'm a teacher, and one of the things that strikes me about being at school right now is that things are so far from what normal would be, not just because kids have masks on, not because, we've always sanitized and physical distancing. It's just very odd to see kids not close together. But one of the things that really is so different is how you can instruct students. And, we can get them back into the buildings, but it's really difficult to do the types of activities that we maybe did a year ago. And I think that'll be really important as part of these plans, is to be very clear, especially with distancing going down, that we're clear about what the do's and the don'ts are for classroom instruction, as far as not telling teachers what to do, but like what's safe to do as far as what we know at this moment in time. Like, how does group work if you can do it? Now with in our hybrid model where I work, I'm able to do kind of some semblance of that with very clear directions to kids. But when I have 24 kids in front of me, that's probably not possible. So it just looks so different. So really being clear about what kinds of things, again, to Member Lavoie's point, thinking outside of the box, can we do with kids in our new normal right now, while we're waiting for that herd immunity to come in, I guess.
Those are great points, Christina, and I do appreciate kind of looking at what is happening now, what might work, how is that going to be a challenge with all those kids in the classroom, moving forward this spring and going into the fall. So maybe that 85 should be more like 75%, or maybe 70.
Got Linda Woodland.
I actually think that member Otmar was ahead of me in the chat.
I was just going to put forward a motion to extend 10:30.
Second.
All right, motion to extend the meeting has been made and seconded. It's subject to 2/3 vote. So Randy, could you call the roll?
Sure. Member Ayala?
Ayala, yes.
Bennett?
Bennett, yes.
Brown?
I think Brown left.
Brown? No. Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson?
Yes.
Haber?
Yes.
Imber, I don't believe he's back on. Kirschenbaum?
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy?
Lavoy, yes.
Longbelio?
Yes.
Mills,
Mills?
yes.
Mitchell? Not on. Otmar?
Otmar, yes.
Pantos?
Santos, no.
Shapiro?
Shapiro, yes.
Silva? Silva?
She left.
No. Smith?
Smith, yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Williamson?
Williamson, yes.
Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
Young?
Young, yes.
Okay.
All right, so we're extended to 10:30. Thank you. So we got Linda Woodland now.
So with looking ahead to next year, my question is if we need to do a quick pivot again, if we are able to do full in person with the, some changes, but for some reason we do need to return to a hybrid model, do we have the capacity to change how we do hybrid so it's not this high flex situation? Are there other explorations as like a plan B to make sure that we are better positioned? Because I think that that's been part of the dissatisfaction that crops up, is using this model to be teaching in this kind of disjointed way that creates so much stress for all involved.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that the commissioner has mentioned, and I said this a little earlier, is that he really has no intention of allowing hybrid and/or remote to move forward into next year. I think I agree with you. One of the things that we have to do is think about, okay, if there would be a way in which this might happen, what steps might we take so that we're not doing the HyFlex model, we're doing a separate remote academy. Again, if we're not, we'd have to plan it out in theory to have it ready, but it couldn't be something that we have defined and say, okay, these teachers are going to be teaching from home and this is going to happen. So we couldn't do it that way, but it would have to be kind of theoretical, planned out and laid out in that way. In case there is something where, again, they mandate that we go back, they have to be able to tell us that a hybrid and/or remote would be allowed in the first place.
I guess I would just stress that sometimes it's not people who make this call of what's safe to do or not, as much as I think the state would like to have their authority actually be followed by a non-sentient virus. But
right.
That's what I'm looking at, is just that kind of preparedness so that we're not scrambling in the same way, so that we can do what's best for our students, even if it's in a non-ideal way.
Yeah, that makes sense, Linda.
All right, I got Laura.
Thank you. I would just want to echo what Member Woodland was saying about some other option besides the HyFlex, if we intend to offer some sort of remote academy or some sort of remote option for even just a small cohort. I think thinking sort of outside the box, making sure that we leverage some of the teachers who maybe have have harnessed the technology really well and provide them with an exclusive section or two of remote students so that they're not also working with in-school students at the same time, I think would be a way to provide a better opportunity, a better value added for that cohort C, even if it is, small. But that's where I think the survey is important, to know who intends to stay remote until a vaccine is available for students.
I got Deidre.
I just wanted to add a couple things around the idea of vision for next year. When I think about next year, I kind of understand the want and the need to go back to normal and what that was a year ago, a year and a half ago, whatever normal was for students. But I really don't want us to think about necessarily throwing out everything that we have learned that's been good this year. One of the things, just to point out from my experience, is that my kindergartner is on the computer on a daily basis. And as much as that's not ideal for kindergarten, I would be surprised if as he goes into first grade next year, that he never touches a computer again. Okay, so just kind of thinking of it in that way of like, how can the teachers now incorporate what they've learned and what's been good about using the technology at the elementary school level, at least, because I know we have the 6 through 12, Chromebook program, but looking at the elementary school teachers to kind of embrace what they've learned and what has been good and continue with what's been good with using that technology with these younger kids.
Yeah, I completely agree, Deidre. And I think what will happen is teachers who may not have typically used technology, especially with some of the younger students, have probably found some things that have been, innovative and, kids are just naturally kind of attuned to. So I have a feeling it's going to continue. And please remember, the elementary schools still have Chrome carts, and we're replenishing those. There are going to be lots of opportunities for students if need be to use technology at the early elementary levels.
All right. If there's nothing else with item 3 for next year, let's transition to our last topic, which is regional agreement review. Daryl, can you give an overview of that topic? I think you're on mute there, Daryl.
I apologize. Sorry. I'll just talk through this. So regional agreement, again, this is something that we are, as a district, we need to look at every 5 years. What Member Dennis has done during management, he's pulled together a subcommittee. So the subcommittee's been defined, and the role of the subcommittee is really to review the agreement, identify district and town priorities, hold a public hearing. There will be a draft and review of the agreement, and then ultimately the agreement needs to be submitted to the towns for approval at town meeting. Member Mills is chairing this subcommittee. Ken, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, we're going to meet on Wednesday to discuss these things. We need to talk about a timeline. I mean, getting it by this town meeting seems optimistic, but we'll talk about how we can think about doing that. It might have to be a special town meeting, but we'll discuss timeline. We'll want time on an agenda of a future school committee meeting to hear from members about what their priorities are for that, including at least my personal one would be thinking about reducing the size of the committee, but to hear what the committee has in mind for things to change. But we'll discuss that on Wednesday, and we'll have a structured conversation, like hopefully about what we've thought about, and get input on what folks think about those things, and then what other things folks might have in mind, maybe like we did tonight in the future. And yeah, so the committee will meet on Wednesday, and we'll be able to talk more about it after that. But we will have to move pretty quickly.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Ken. And I want to thank you and the other members who have agreed to step forward with this. This is a process that ordinarily we would have started probably in the spring. and we're finding ourselves in an extremely compressed time frame to conduct a proper review, not only internally but with the towns, with the public, and to be able to hold a hearing. And as Ken mentioned, we'll have to see whether or not we can do this work in time for the existing town meetings, or whether a special town meeting will be required. Any questions, thoughts, or comments? I saw Linda Long-Balil has her hand raised first.
Sorry.
Linda,
Yeah,
are you there?
I answered my question. I'm all set. Thank you.
Super. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments on regional agreement? Okay.
Mike, I have my hand
All
up.
right. So with that,
Mike, Mike, sorry.
Okay.
I have my
Malia.
hand up.
Didn't see
Wasn't
it.
quick enough. Sorry. I just have a process question, and I will certainly, my only feedback is that I did watch management and I heard discussion of public hearings, and I know that's a tricky thing right now, but I would encourage the committee to think creatively about how to do that and be inclusive of people who may not want to go to a physical public meeting. Because even if there is a hybrid type situation, there are still members of the public who may not want to physically go into a space. I know I haven't gone to a Holden Town meeting, even though we can, because I'm not comfortable going into space yet. It's just, there are people with medical reasons they can't. So I guess to be inclusive, I encourage the committee to think creatively about how to include those people as well. And I'm not sure the answer to that. But that's my only process feedback. I don't know if there's a virtual way to do it like we did tonight or whatnot, but I just don't want to lose sight of that. I'd hate to exclude people from commenting if it weren't at least a hybrid situation, because there are people with opinions who may not be comfortable walking into a room. So that's my only feedback.
Got it.
And it may be
Great. Thank
faster,
you.
honestly.
Mike Pantos?
I was wondering if we might be starting the discussion either a month from now or anytime soon about school committee meetings in person, if we're talking about kids going back to school in person.
So the question on school committee meetings, I think at this point we are at least asking the administration to tell us what may or may not be feasible. So this is not an item that's intended for us to discuss in any detail tonight, but we are at least asking the administration to identify what is and what is not feasible, with no particular time frame in mind at the moment.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Seeing none, let's move on. There's no unfinished business. Under Secretary's report, without objection, I'd like to hold over on executive session meeting minutes until our next executive session meeting. That would leave us with items on the agenda G, H, and I. I'd like to take those together and without objection, accept the motion or accept the meeting minutes under unanimous consent.
So moved.
Hearing no objections. I think without objection, we're going to accept those under unanimous consent. I'm sorry, I meant to include K. So this is special meeting G, regular meeting under H, special meeting under I, regular meeting under K. Again, hearing no objections, we'll accept those under unanimous consent. Next item, Treasury Report financial statements. We'll go into the Treasurer's report, but there is a meeting of Business Finance tomorrow night. Certainly reach out to Dan Dede. Under committee reports, I'll be brief. Under Management Subcommittee, we did meet last week. We spoke about a number of the things that we mentioned earlier, in particular on regional agreement, as well as how we're structuring some of these items going forward. I'll go down the list. If you have something that you want to share or don't want to share, don't feel that you have to at this point, but if you have an update you'd like to share, feel free to do it. Education Subcommittee with Christine.
Yes, we met last Thursday. We talked about budget priorities, specifically looking at the technology plan, the staffing plan for the district, the textbook plan, and we took a look at all of those items. So that was pretty much what we did at our last meeting. And we're meeting again on, our next meeting is on Monday at 6 o'clock prior to our meeting here.
Great, thank you. If somebody has a question as we go through along, just ping in the chat and we'll stop. Otherwise, I'm going to move forward. Business finance, we'll turn to you, Ken.
Tomorrow night we're meeting, so we'll have a report next time.
Sounds good. Legal affairs, I know Scott left. Carl, is there something that, an update you want to give?
Just our next meeting is on the 10th, so a week from Wednesday. We'll have, after that, we should be able to talk the para MOA as well. So that we should be able to kind of talk that after that.
Good deal. Thank you. Superintendent goals and evaluation, Matt.
Next meeting is March 22nd.
Thank you. Facilities and security, Adam.
So we met on the 16th. We discussed a whole lot of stuff. It was a big meeting. Some of the key items were the updated CDC guidelines, status, issues, and successes of the hybrid reopening in January, some of the IT and tech issues people have seen, and just to note, just before, I believe it was the week before that meeting, over 200 computers for teachers had arrived, desktops, which are much more powerful than what they had and significantly more powerful than the Chromebooks that a lot of them have been using. Also, one of the things that, in the meeting we said we wanted to talk about, or at least for me to say in this meeting, is we wanted to recognize just the huge effort and the progress that had gone on throughout the whole district for all the HVAC maintenance and improvements. We've all heard stories over the years with our kids in school and talking to other people, rooms that are hot, cold, blowers don't work, too loud. I mean, that's all fixed. I mean, all of it across the board. Every single room has at least 4 air exchanges an hour now. Systems that the thermostats haven't worked in a decade. They're fixed. I mean, new airlines for those. I don't even know how this stuff works, but I mean, just the level of effort. They basically turned around years, decades of missed maintenance and redid it in the order of months. So just big kudos to everybody that was involved in that. I know there's a lot of overtime, a lot of district personnel working on that every day. So we just thanks to them, and we just did want to highlight that because it's not something you hear about often. And I believe our next meeting we're shooting for the 25th. I don't know if that's set in stone yet, but hopefully it will be by tomorrow morning.
Good deal. Thank you. Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Subcommittee. I believe Asma has left. Linda Woodland. You have an update to share?
Yeah. So we met, I think it was last week now, and we've been working on the harassment policy update, which is actually quite involved, and it involves a lot of other related policies. So that's been taking quite some time while we go through thoughtfully with research. And then we are scheduled to meet next on the 23rd, when I believe we'll be hearing an update on the DEEP, I think that's the acronym, for anti-racism and diversity goals for the district.
Great, thank you. Audit Advisory Board, I believe Ben's not with us tonight. Adam, is there an update on audit?
We have not met, and I don't know of any updates.
Okay, thank you. Ad hoc subcommittee, I think we spoke about the regional agreement. Ken, you can, if there's something more you want to say, you can shake your head yes or no, but say no, so we'll think we've got that one covered. Next item, there's no building committees. So we'll open it up to school council reports. If you have a school council report that you'd like to give, raise your hand in the chat and we'll cover it. I got Sherry.
Thanks. I went to NAQUAG on the 24th for our Simcoe. Happy to see that the assistant principal is now in place there. She seems great. I was offered a building tour, which I did accept. And I was thrilled to see how well the kids are doing, how well the teachers are doing with the kids. They have the remote kids up on the smart board, so they are interacting with their in-school classmates, which was terrific. Yeah, and of course they have all the usual NAQUAG things going on, from bingo to 100th day of school. They're really doing well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Any other school council reports? Not seeing any. Next item is our second public hearing. I have not seen anything come through. Request to speak in our second public hearing tonight. Barry, you can tell me if I'm incorrect on that. Next item of business is new business. Does any members have, or do any members have any items of new business they wish to be taken up at a future school committee meeting? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. I was going to say Robin again. Randy, would you mind calling the roll?
Sure. Member Ayala, oh my God, I'm getting tired. Member Ayala, I'm sorry.
It's Ayala, yes.
Melissa.
Yep, Melissa's fine.
I'm so sorry. Member Bennett.
Yes.
Member Brown.
He left.
He left.
Member Dennis.
Dennis, yes.
Gustafson.
Yes.
Haber.
Haber, yes.
Kirschenbaum.
Kirschenbaum, yes.
Lavoy.
Lavoy, yes.
Longbelial.
Longbelial, yes.
Mills.
Mills, yes.
Otmar.
Otmar, yes.
Pantos.
Yes.
Shapiro.
Shapiro, yes.
I'm not sure if Silva came back. Okay. Smith.
Smith, yes.
Sullivan.
Sullivan, yes.
Williamson.
Williamson, yes.
Woodland.
Woodland, yes.
And Young.
Young, yes.
Thank you. Our meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.